I'm Blaise Saunders.
And I'm Craig Corsai, and we're the founders of Light in the Wilderness Ministries.
Our goal is to bring testimonies of followers of Jesus Christ to the world.
If you'd like to learn more about our ministry, check out our website at lightinthewilderness.org.
Yeah.
Hey everybody, welcome to Light in the Wilderness. We got a special guest on today, a dear friend of mine who's a brother in the Lord, also a brother in the Marine Corps, Marine Major David Pham, Purple Heart recipient, served in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. We're excited to have him on. He has an amazing story, and we're excited to see what the Lord does with this time.
Absolutely. And I can say, having spent the last 2 years getting to know this dear brother as a good, very close friend, that he is all the things that we have heard about him, which is professional, devoted to God, a brother in the Lord. And having gotten to know you over this time, I'm a witness to it. You live Christ, man.
Yeah.
And it's impressive.
Thank you. Y'all are too kind, and it's an honor to be here. I think for me, it's knowing y'all has changed my life, and not just for me, but more importantly, since we met, I've become a husband in between, right? So Natalie and I got married, and I remember this is one of the first times I brought her up here. I mean, meeting you, and for her to meet Libby, and Tosh and Z. It's just been, I think she fell in love with this, and now we're proud property owners in Maine, so you can't beat that. And there's something special about this land up here and your home, Craig, and I'm so grateful for just being here. But it's an amazing opportunity to just be around men who fellowship and can proclaim their love for Christ, and but also still be strong and bold and brave for their families. So, yeah, things are good.
That's awesome, brother. So the mission and the goal, we use the word mission, that will kind of be familiar to you, right? So the mission and the goal for this podcast is to bring testimonies of followers of Christ like you to the planet, to the globe. And I've heard a bunch of your story, and every time I hear it, I just keep being wowed. And I think, I said this in the last one, which is that the best place sometimes to start with these stories is in the beginning. But with this part, what I want to hear, because you just got back from a hunt in Canada, right?
Yeah, Newfoundland. So that's how to pronounce it.
Do you want to just kind of like warm us up, break the ice a little bit with a little bit of a story?
Moose hunt too, right?
Moose hunt, which again, it's y'all are pretty familiar with moose up here in Maine. I know the opportunity came up very much of a God thing as well as. I got introduced to this amazing nonprofit that just helps veterans decompress in the wilderness, lack of a better term. But it's Freedom Hunters. And I know Jim Shockey sponsors it as well. And they basically just pull veterans and active duty members out into the woods. And it gives us time to decompress and to spend time in creation. And got this call. Actually, funny enough, how this led to it, all of it's surrounded, God whispers. But last year, I was a day out of a whitetail hunt, and I get a call from Tom, who's one of the lead directors down in Eastern Virginia, and he's like, "Hey, Dave, excited for the hunt?" I'm like, "Yeah." It's like, "Well, I got an idea for you. Just want to bring it up, and I don't know how to bring it up, but there's a son's coming back from deployment, and he kind of wants to bring his dad." I'm like, "Say less. Like, if you need to take my spot for the hunt, give it to this family, and I'm so gracious to even have this opportunity, but please just take it and give it away, no questions asked." They even let him finish the sentence, and he's like, well, we'll take care of you in the future." But okay, Tom, you don't have to, but whatever it is, I'm grateful for. So in August of this year, so really 2.5 months to make the decision, he calls me up and he's like, "Hey man, how do you want to go moose hunting?" I'm like, "What? Like, are you kidding me?" Like, once in a lifetime for me, and it's always been a dream. And I've put into the Maine lottery every year since I met y'all, so still no luck there yet. But he's like, "Yeah, we have a seat for you to go to Newfoundland," and I was floored, just grateful and blessed. And he's like, "Hey, better than that, you could bring somebody." I'm like, "You gotta be kidding me, man!" And it's I always say this: God's not a genie, right? Like, you don't pray for stuff and then he's gonna bless you with things. God doesn't grant wishes, but I heard this in a sermon a while ago, and it's God does have favor for the ones who love and follow.
For sure.
Right. And you have to be open to hear those and feel those. And I used to be almost to a detriment, like try to be overly humble because that's what the Bible tells you to do, and you kind of self-deprecating at some point. And one of my, I think it might have been one of y'all saying, hey, just appreciate the blessing.
Yeah.
Like stop, like just appreciate the blessing, and just receive, and because God's gonna use you. And if you refuse the blessing, you may have missed out on blessing others, right? So I took that opportunity to be like, okay, hey, thank you, Lord, for this amazing opportunity to go hunt. Who do I take?
Yeah, right.
And at this point, Craig, Blaze, like all these lists, everybody, my brother-in-law who serves as well, even Z, right? Z, love him, war hero, and has moved up here since, and leads a lot of time in the woods. But he's a guide up here, so does he really need this moose hunt? So prayed on it, and God, just like anything in our lives, the Spirit's like, take this person. So my buddy Dan, we'll keep his life pretty private, but 31 years in the Marine Corps, and this comes into play later with some of the God winks.
God winks?
Yeah, God winks. So
Yeah.
somebody told me that term of like, just, hey, this is a little God whisper, God wink, like, hey, I'm still here with you.
Yeah, I love it. I'm going to use that.
Yeah, thanks, man. But yeah, it's, so thought about Dan, gave him a call. And this guy he's been here 31 years. So he works in parallel with 3-star level commands. And Craig, you know this. You're busy, right? Like at that level, you're constantly in meetings, you're constantly making decisions. I think his agency that he's with now is like 80,000, just something, an obnoxious number. So long shot, hey man, Dan, can you come to this? Can you take some leave, maybe 10, 15 days of leave and come hunt with me?
half your vacation.
Yeah, half your vacation of the year. Tell your 3-star general that, hey, throw some deuces, I'll see you later. I'm gonna go hunt. Peace out, I'm gonna go hunt. And I just long shot, gave him a call. He's like, when is it? I was like, October. I was like, oh, kind of silence on the phone a bit. Well, my boss has his change of command on October 5th. So I'm free.
Wow.
So look at that timing. Like 2 months prior to this event happening, call this guy up out of the blue, executive level leadership. And then miraculously, 2 weeks prior to actually 1 week prior to us leaving, his boss has a change of command. So he's essentially turning over a lot of his duties so that he could actually come.
Just a coincidence.
Just a coincidence, right? Yeah. So, quote unquote coincidence, we always use those terms. But, funny on that, when I visited Israel, I think I told you all this in the past, I did my walkabout in Israel, and one of the Israelis I met was like, hey, in the Hebrew language, there's no such thing as coincidence. Everything is divine providence.
I love that.
So the word is like not even there.
Not even in God's language.
Yeah, it's not even God's language. It's just like, hey, this was God. Like coincidences just do not happen.
Wow.
And we always say coincidence, but yeah, coincidences happen all the time in our lives, right? For all of us, and I can't wait to get into that with y'all. But so yeah, this coincidence that he was able to go on the hunt, and then we're able to make it all work out. So he was able to take his time off. And what was amazing was in 10 years, besides the time that we actually served together, we maybe have a handful of times we actually hung out. And we actually did 2 hunts prior to that, whitetails, go sit in the blind, nothing. So this third one, I was like, all right, God, this is the time if you're gonna bring something in front of us. So my entire heart was like, I want Dan to be able to relax, decompress. His wife, Val, super supportive, incredible. Like it was one of those phone calls where she was like, go, why are you still here? So amazing woman and homeschool type of mom, so incredible. And she was just like, hey, leave. You need the decompression time. Go with Dave. And so we took off. And I felt called actually, well, we have a lot of time on this drive, so maybe we put in an audiobook. And last year, because I met Natalie, my amazing wife, her family was like, hey, you should read this book, Fearless. I think you'll love that. So have y'all heard this book before? So
I have.
It's Adam Brown, Navy SEAL, Dev Grew, SEAL Team 6 guy. I won't spoil the book, but he basically struggled in life. Meth addict, everything struggled. And through that, and his father was a pastor. And through that, though, he kept his faith. Finally met his amazing wife, and then continued to grow in his faith. still dealing with his meth addiction while going through buds.
Wow.
While serving as an active duty Navy SEAL. And then he even, I think in the book they talk about he had a relapse as a member of SEAL Team 6 or DevGru. And his brothers kept him accountable, and like Christ's faith got him through it. But this book is incredible, right? Like just, if you deep dive into it, Fearless. It's called Fearless, about Adam Brown, and so much respect for that community, but so much respect for him as a man of Christ and follower of Christ. And he was able to use that experience to minister to his brothers and sisters around him as well. So that was incredible. But I was like, hey, that's the perfect book for me and Dan, right?
Yeah.
So started with one of the first kind of.
So that was your journey all the way up to Canada.
That was like 8 hours. I mean, the journey took about 3 days to get there, but it was 8 hours of just listening to this book, Christ, this and that. And you know, Dan's a believer, and but just we could all use a sword sharpening and honing every now and then. So the Spirit was like, hey, put in the book. So funny thing, Dan and I are catching up. We're talking old war stories and everything else. He brings up one of his deployments about Iraq, and he brings up, something on April 4th, Iraq, and some of that was, as you're familiar with, is Fallujah and Phantom Fury later on in November, which we're coming up on the 20-year anniversary of for those Fallujah Marines. But yeah, so he. Yeah. He 2005. But yeah, so Dan brings up April 4th, April 2004. So that date kind of sticks with me. We're talking, so some major things happened in Iraq. We're listening to the book, and then they're going through his deployments. He's like, well, his first deployment was in April 2004 as a Navy SEAL, and I'm like, are you kidding me? To Iraq. So people might look at it as like, oh, funny coincidence, but we literally were talking about just our own personal experience in deployment.
Yeah, right.
And April 2004 comes up, and then the book literally was like April 2004. And then throughout the book, actually more things happened and things just kept coming up. But that was kind of the first little bit of God wink going into this. Yeah. Some other amazing stories happened. Met some amazing Canadians who were patriots, like U.S. patriot type of things, where they fully supported Americans and they loved Americans and they loved us, meeting us. And Natalie heckled me for wearing this hat over there, but I was like, I'm going to wear this American flag hat.
Show the Canadians.
Yeah, show the Canadians, but they actually loved it. They were like, dude, yeah, and they had their political views and everything, but they're like, we love you. So that was really amazing to appreciate, have a U.S. appreciation time. Yeah. Right? So like you go into another country, that's first world. I mean, they're absolutely very similar to us, but they're the ones preaching and our freedoms and our abilities to do what we do. So that was amazing. But fast forward a little bit, we have a 5-day hunt in the wilderness, just being out in creation. Newfoundland is just an amazing display of God's creation. And I told these folks, because I started digging into the history of it. And they would say less than 1,000 folks have seen some of the terrain that we saw. Really? Yeah, so think through that. Wow. There's property in the world right now, and there's 8 billion people, I think 7 or 8 billion people on the planet. The things that our eyes were able to see and where our feet was able to walk, less than 1,000 folks have experienced that. Wow. And according to them, even less than several hundred. So that was an amazing, this is from God's creation. We are here now. So this is no weak course that you're on. This is we are out there in the backcountry. Yeah, it took us forever to get out there, and painful time, but wow. I think through adversity, you find God out there with us.
There's no Starbucks out there.
Yeah, there's no Starbucks. There's not even close. There's a jet boil.
Fans just scrolling,
There's Starlink. Yeah, so they did have a Starlink, which is
friend Elon Musk.
I know, your friend Elon, but they did have a Starlink. So, but we try to stay off the technology, and you had your jet boil. It felt like I was a Marine again, and I can kind of go into that later of how I always tell people hunting saved my life. I think that's a little bit of a longer story. So another crazy coincidence. We show up. It's a veteran hunt. So there's 4 U.S. Marines. We've never met each other, or except for me and Dan. We start connecting. You know where I'm going with this. It's like, oh, you're an EOD? Like, do you know this guy? I was like, oh yeah, you know this guy? It's like, oh, I love that guy. Literally started sending messages with selfies of us. And all of our buddies were like, bro, just so amazed on how thousands of miles away. Yeah. And
And I just want to interject there with something because for people that are listening, we talked about a wink. We talked about this little joke, like, oh, it's just a coincidence, and then how you dropped that there's no coincidences in the Hebrew language. Is that, or in the word coincidence in the Hebrew language, is I think that if everyone starts thinking about, especially as men of God, how God is constantly there, just winking, just like interacting with our lives consistently. And I don't want to undersell it, because in my own life, it's not even just a wink. It's like once you commit to God, once you say, Father, I just give you everything, God just is just there, bang, 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 constantly there for you. Right. And I'm not talking about it from some sort of like prosperity gospel type thing. I'm talking about it. Yes, there is prosperity and there's provision, but there's also through these trials and these hard times, God is constantly there encouraging you, whether it's a dream or whether it's a friend coming up and you see something, you're like, man, how did that just happen like that? And people that are listening will know what I'm talking about, because if you give God glory, you'll remember all of these things. And if we look at the Old Testament, we look throughout Scripture, God had the Israelites constantly telling everybody to have a festival, have a date of this, to remember to tell your children these stories. Why did God do that? It's because He wants us to remember. And so even in this, just you retelling a story, giving God glory about these winks, these coincidences. I'm doing air quotes anyone listening on Spotify, but ultimately it's just God's footprint and fingerprint over everything. And I think I just want everyone to think about that for a second, like while they're listening to this, and to really reflect on that, and just take a couple of seconds to be like, where is it that God has done this in my life? And you'll have a trillion ideas.
Ooh, that's powerful.
And so and again, I mean, this is not my story right now, but it's yours. But I have a lot of them too, so we can get into them. You know?
Oh, I love it. Yeah, and again, I hate the interview format, so I just love talking with my brothers.
Yeah.
So another amazing one was, so we show up again, making all these connections. These two Canadian veterans show up. Okay, in what world, what can we connect between Marines or U.S. Marines and Canadian veterans, right? So I start talking. And this guy's got a full beard, still active duty. I saw Tom say, oh, so, you're still in? He's like, yeah, man, 31 years. I was like, oh, 31 years. Dan, how many years have you been in? 31. I was like, oh, that's weird. And hey, so what's your rank? Talk to the Canadian. He's like, Sergeant Major. I was like, Dan? So Dan, Sergeant Major. So again, thousands of miles away on a chance contact on a hunt, a moose hunt that we've never expected in a million years that we'd go on. Two separate sergeants majors who's been in 31 years who joined the same year meet each other. One from Canada, one from the U.S.
Wow.
Immediate connection. And what's weird, I have a photo of this. They have the same Nalgene bottle, which again, might be pushing it. The same Nalgene bottle.
Water bottle.
Yeah, water bottle.
Oh, right.
Again, might be pushing it, might be stretching it a bit, but I was like, that's weird.
The stories, and this actually transitions to another story that you and I met on and we all kind of connected on. But the stories of these coincidences coming together always remind me, if you've ever heard of any stories of like out-of-body experiences, people that have died, that left their body and then like been in front of God or been brought into heaven's realm and then come back to tell about it. Everybody always talks about the familiarity of family around them. Like there's a great story called Heaven is for Real. I think it's a movie. People are going to have all sorts of views on this, but this boy goes to heaven, right? And he comes back and he tells a story about how he met his grandfather and then he saw his little sister who passed away, that he had no idea of, but his little sister that had passed away during she had a miscarriage. His mum had a miscarriage. But all of these stories, and there's such a pattern through them, which is that God always brings around these familiar people to us to give us comfort, to give us peace, and just to make us feel at home, And so when I see that, where you've got like even just these numbers aligning, 31 years, Sergeant Major, it just makes everybody go, hey man, we're the same, we're brothers, And so that again shows this, this connectedness. But when you get into the world and you get into the way of the enemy, there's always chaos and disorder, and there's always fear and instability, and there's always division. As opposed to in godly environments, it's always peace and joy and unity. Absolutely. So I think that's just another testament to exactly God's fingerprint on these things. So I think another glory to God there.
That's great. And to even just cut it short, just because I could go talk about hunting forever. And part of it, hunting did save my life, and the time in creation has been so decompressing. And And actually, the entire time I prayed that Dan would get his first.
His what?
Get his moose first.
Yeah.
I wanted him, like, even if I was just, again, God's not a genie. We're not wishing that. But I was like, Lord, like, if it's be your will, please.
Now, were you guys hunting together?
Yeah, we were hunting together. And that's the thing I told them. They were talking about separating us. And I'm like, no. Hunting's never been, and you know this, Craig, is hunting's never been about the harvest, right? The kill of the animal. It's being in the wilderness, being in God's creation, appreciating it, but also fellowship with your brothers,
right?
Or your wife or your sister. Like I brought my wife on a hunt here, and that was so amazing for us. And but yeah, no. So the entire time I was praying that Dan would get his first, and I kept telling him, I was like, I'm not shooting it. I was like, well, if it's a big one, you shoot. I'm like, no, I don't care what comes out, you're shooting it.
Wow.
So about 2 days in, we finally, and we had some weird opportunities, and we finally rolled a ball on, and he jumped out, saw a cow, harvested it, great shot, almost like a drill, and it felt like we were back in combat. It was like tripod down, guns in, I'm reading out the ranges, he sighted in, boom, beautiful shot, no pain for the cow at all, and she drops, and that's it, that's the story. And then almost similar to our hunt story, the next 2 days was like rainy, freezing weather. It's like below freezing, but raining, so it didn't make any sense. But it was just, we're out there, nothing. And then for my moose, 45 minutes left. And we're glassing, and this thing pops out. Actually, a giant bull comes out, chasing a cow, 2 kilometers away. And 45 minutes left of light.
Little hard shot.
Yeah, it's just like, how do you, we're not shooting that. So we got to move. So we're booking it. We're just going. And we're chasing after this bull, chasing after this cow. And then we see them just crest the ridge, and I was gonna just run up on top of the ridge and take a shot. And we're guessing it maybe 200, 300 yards by the time we make it up there. And then out of the right side, a smaller bull is chasing them. So we literally, talking about timing, how did we miraculously just cut off the line? And then we turn around and we're like, hey, you gonna hit it or not? And again, and maybe this is I always associate things with lessons in life. Is like, sometimes you're chasing after that big thing, right?
Yeah, right.
And God is like, no. Like, I know you want that, right? And I know we've probably had some stories that figure this, but that's not what you're gonna get now. You're gonna get this, and I need you to be joyful in that.
Wow.
Right. So it ended up being a 2-year-old 6-point moose, which people would look at as, is that a deer? But I'm like, I don't care. Like, I'm here fellowshipping with my brother. And we were able to harvest the moose. And yes, this paddled. I mean, this is like it's almost as big as Libby. So like this giant paddled moose is like leaving me in the distance. But in that moment, again, focus on the mission. We saw it at 100 yards facing us. And I think it thought we were either the cow or a competitive bull. And as you know, moose have bad eyesight. I think you told me that, Craig. Moose have horrible eyesight. Starts chasing us down, like barreling down on us. Frontal shot, 100 yards. In 3 seconds, it closed about 40 yards. So it's about 60 yards for me, frontal shot. And I remember having this conversation before about, okay, if it's a frontal shot, where do you shoot, right? Because it's not vital. So aimed exactly where we thought. Heart shot, puts it down very peacefully, and was able to harvest it. But it was just like immediately happened. And I think the lesson there for me too was everything that I've trained for years, shooting on the range, right? zeroing your weapon, honing your craft, hunting. It literally came down to 10 seconds. But in that 10 seconds though, and I think this is how it relates to how Christ sometimes works in our lives, and I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on it as well, is God gives you the tools. When he puts the opportunity in the thing in front of your face, you still need to pull the trigger.
That's right. And
you need to be able to commit, and you need to be able to use all that training that he's given you and then utilize that moment, or you let it pass. And I would say, and I'm thinking about this now, I think either option would have been great too.
Wow.
And I think that applies to us, right? Like, yeah, here's your opportunity. If you want to take it, if you're not, I'm going to keep moving you on this path. There's no wrong answer in that. So if I took the shot, great, I harvested animal. If I didn't, what's the worst thing that could happen? The moose moves on, lives a happy life, mates and harvests and reproduces a whole lot more. But I think there was no wrong answer in that. I could have taken a shot and I couldn't have. So like, that's how much, like talking about light in the wilderness, I love this so much from y'all, because there's so many lessons in the wilderness that people just don't get to see because they don't go out into the wilderness. And you're unable to experience God in a way that I think millions and billions of people don't get to experience either. But yeah, so even just that 1 10-second opportunity just opened the doors for us to talk about Christ, to teach us lessons on, do I take this moment? Do I take the big shot? Do I chase after the bigger thing? Do I seize the moment that God gave me? Do I pass on it? And yeah, so the hunt, to your point earlier, it was an amazing God experience. The stories go on, but those are just some of the lessons that I pulled out from 5 days in the wilderness.
Beautiful, man. And also that too, just the humility of that, like the giving up of the opportunity, you know, like you're there saying, hey, my brother's more important, that he gets something first as opposed to me putting it, and then you getting to the place where you're like, hey, I might miss out on this, but if I do, I had an amazing time with my brother, he got something. And I think that's I mean, look, I'm not as accomplished as hunters as you guys are at the moment, but I'm growing in that, and even in just the time that I have been hunting, I look at it and I think, wow, you know, so many guys out there are just like, oh, I get this big photo, there's a trophy, and it's like it's more about what appears to be like about a vanity at times with this stuff, as opposed to that joy of like getting out in the wilderness, actually, you know, going and harvesting something in the time and you know, letting God provide you what He wants to provide you, as opposed to you saying, hey, I'm going to go get the biggest thing out there. You know, I think that that there's something just in accepting what God brings you and gives you.
It was just like the time that David came, we did a deer hunt together, and the first day the weather was beautiful outside. It was me, him, and Z, and we're sitting in the blind. This buck comes out, like right as soon as we get in the blind, this nice shooter comes out. David gets on him, and he's a good shot. He gets down behind the deer, pulls the trigger. The deer hits the ground. We're celebrating. It gets up and heads off in the woods. We go down there, can't find any blood. We're tracking this thing, and we're like, we just couldn't figure it out. I don't know if he hit it high or what happened. We didn't know. So anyway, so now we got to keep hunting, right? So we go back to the blind. We're sitting in the blind for the next 3 days. Below zero.
One day was below zero. The wind,
40-mile-an-hour winds, snowing. Right. I mean, extreme conditions. And we're like, we just didn't understand. Like, man, he's a good shot. I don't know what's going on. But God took those 3 days and allowed that time. What I didn't know, He needed that time in the blind. He needed that fellowship time, that one-on-one time. So anyway, during that 3 days, God did a lot. And go ahead, man. Share that.
So. You know, I know earlier you mentioned trying to talk or wanting to talk about the childhood too, but we could jump right in the middle. Yeah. Because this was actually a dark time in my life. And I just needed the fellowship, and God knew. Right. And I guess we can come back to this, but God knew what I needed. And that shot, I got to show you the shot because again, we harvested.
Yeah, we ended up killing that.
We ended up killing that same deer. Yeah.
Came back out.
3 days later, it rose from the dead.
3 days later, it literally right. 3 days later.
Wow.
This thing comes. Oh yeah, that's right. I didn't make that connection. That's hilarious. But no, 3 days later, so
there's too many fingerprints of God over everything.
No, this story is.
Wow. So hang on. Just so everyone can get this context for everybody at home. Is that so? You in a blind, you guys are hunting together. Bang! You drop an animal.
Dropped it.
Like
I mean, it did not move.
Up, back into the woods.
Yep.
3 days later.
3 days later.
This same deer comes out.
3 days later, we hunted again, through all tribulations and adversity, right? Like rain, sleet, it's just horrible. I mean, we have
because you have this heart sinking. Like I've got this thing, it's dead, and now is it gone? It's being eaten by coyotes.
Sick, and the feeling. Like, did I wound this thing? And that's the worst feeling. Is as a hunter, you don't want to wound an animal.
Yeah,
that's
totally.
The worst thing
Yeah.
But we have pictures of this. We have pictures of the snow. We have pictures. We have filming like this 40-mile-an-hour gust of wind. Like, it just does. It's insane.
Wow.
The last day. There was 3 minutes left. Oh, I guess 3 minutes. But yeah, it was 3 minutes left. There was a couple of deer out in the field, and this other big one. And Craig's like, "No, that's not it. That's not the one." And I was like, "Okay," because I'll shoot it. He's like, "No, that's not the one. Just wait." 3 minutes left of daylight, and we look over our shoulder, and Craig's like, "That's it." I'm like, we see him. Like, it's legal shooting. Like, we see the body, we see antlers. I was like, "How do you know?" He's like, "No, that's the one." And again, I've never asked you how you knew, but you knew. Boom, lined it up, took the shot, dropped it, right? And I was like, I think it's the one. Craig was like absolutely confident. So we go dress it out. So, we dress it out, we put it away. And I love doing the whole, field dressing everything myself as well, just because it's very cathartic and kind of being one with the animal.
Yeah, we've butchered a bit together.
Some of the butchering and harvesting the meat. So I'm skinning it out, and I see this weird line in the hide, and I'm like, that's a weird line. So I call Craig out there, and I'll send you the picture. Maybe you can show the audience. But there's just like I'm skinning it out, and I see this weird line. I'm like, that's really weird. Call Craig out. Look at the other side. I'm like, that looks like a burn mark. So again, I'm shooting at 45-70. So what we think, and actually what I know happened, is because it was right on the spine. Whatever God did with that bullet. And there wasn't a far shot. It was like a 100-yard shot. And I'm not saying
You never miss.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying I never miss. Or like, I'm out there as a sniper or anything. I'm not.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty, like at 100 yards, I'm pretty much very confident with this.
You're a trained Marine.
For somehow my round to move and graze the back of this deer and burn and sear the skin off and basically leave a mark. And then
the shock stunned the deer's spine and paralyzed it for a second.
Yeah. Like somebody punched you in the spine, basically, and then he gets back up and he leaves. And he shows up 3 days later.
Far out.
And God used those 3 days for fellowship.
Yeah, for fellowship.
And then again, I'm with this with.
And I didn't know this at the time, but he was going through one of the darkest times in his life.
It was, and we can come back to that, but if we want to hit the childhood.
Well, there's just the Christophany as well of 3 days. So it's not just 2, it's 3, right? And then you have this at the final light. As the light's coming down, you're in the last legal minutes of light, and then you get this animal coming back out.
I'm glad we even have this recorded because I tell this story and it's just more and more comes out of it because you're just like, oh, I forgot that was like, or you realize more of it's a God thing. And I think, like you said earlier, when you really reflect on your life, how much of it is permeated by Christ and the Spirit, right? And until you reflect, you don't get that. Yeah.
So I think also for everyone listening, because we're going to have people listening from all different parts of the world, some of which know nothing about hunting, some of which know a lot about hunting, some of which would be against hunting, and have a bit of grace on it, people that maybe do some things that you're unaware of, but meaning as a listener. But the big community here in Maine is that there, and obviously a lot of the country there's a big hunting community here, and even as a witness coming into that, I mean, I came from Australia where we would spearfish and I've shot a couple of kangaroos, but then coming out here and getting my first deer out here with these guys was great. But I think, being able to see the respect that these men have for hunting, have for these animals, and have for the respect for God's creation and what you've been doing has been amazing. And then the discipline that you learn through it, the perseverance, the friendships, and even just this, talking about 3 days out in the wilderness and just this connection back to God, and then just hearing the humility. And I mean, anybody who eats meat, I don't think could argue against hunting and the fact that it's probably one of the cleanest things you can do with meat and the treatment of animals and all those sorts of things. So I think ultimately, I think a lot of guys in this community too could really take a lot from hearing this, where so many people are so focused on, we're coming into this season now, which starts tomorrow, right? And so many people are just focused on, they leave their families alone, they leave everything, and they're out there just trying to get this thing. But I think if we look at it from what you're saying, which is, it's about drawing nearer to God, right? As Christians listening to this, right? Drawing nearer to God, saying, Lord, what is it that you're going to provide me for here in this time? And if it's smaller or if it's bigger or if it's whatever, just let it be, Father, from you. And then I think that we can have that across our lives, right? Like, because it's like, I need more money, I need that bigger, better job, I need this thing, I need a better house, I need that. It's like, okay, God, what is it you're bringing here? So I think that's the theme that I'm sort of hearing and what I've been learning, watching a lot of this, and just, a very quick little story. It reminds me just real fast, we all have a mutual friend, Jeremy, and it was Jeremy's first time ever hunting, and I was sort of like my third time hunting. We were on a bear hunt with Craig, and I remember we'd been out for a week on this bear hunt, and I remember I think it was the Thursday, and I felt I think it was my turn coming up to go hunting and go for this bear, and I remember the Spirit of God telling me, He just said, Blaze, I want you to tell Jeremy that it's his turn. It's his turn, and I was just like, those words. It's his turn. Like, this is for Jeremy. And I was like, okay, cool. So I was like, Jeremy, you go first, because I think we're going to do something like, I don't know, rock, paper, scissors or something like that for the next. And I was like, no, it's you, Jeremy. And anyway, so he goes to this hunt and he gets this like Maine state record bear, like this incredible bear, like 5 feet away, headshot, just awesome kill, right? This awesome bear. But I was like, man, God, like you really, I could just feel it in your spirit, like this give this to your brother. You know, not that it was mine necessarily, and who knows what would have played out, but I just knew in my spirit that that's what God wanted me to do, and that's what you did in this journey. And I think a lot of people can learn from that, and just taking care of our brothers, our wives, our children, our family, putting others before ourselves, loving others like we love ourselves, which is what you did. Like most people, are like, man, I want that shot. You know, I'm gonna get the first shot. You know, so I think anyway. We can learn a lot from that.
I think you just hit a great point there too. Is and I think even through all that goodness that you just talked about, there's also the enemy wants to attack you there too.
So
because the enemy wants to attack you there too, right?
Yeah.
So like I'm sure there was a split second there where like, man, that could have been my opportunity.
Yeah.
Like every man.
Oh yeah, of course.
Every man experiences that, right? But it's really, you did such a wonderful, humble thing as yourself to sacrifice that for Jeremy. But the enemy, like you can never neglect the enemy's attack.
Yeah, right.
And he will come towards you in the purest moments. Because there's nothing that on earth that the enemy can't touch. So even that purest moment where you gave Jeremy that opportunity, I'm sure there's a whisper like, man, that could have been my bear, right? But there's
Is that really God that said that?
It's like, I want half your meat, man.
Yeah, right. You're just crushing it.
You owe me.
You owe me now. But
never let it go.
No, but I think
always hold it over his head. Yeah, remember that bear?
It's really my bear.
That's my bear, right?
Yeah.
But being a follower of Christ, being in the Word, being faithful, you're like, no, get behind me. Right? And Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." I think though, like that, every time I hear that voice, I imagine Jesus, "Get behind me, Satan." Right? Yeah. Even Peter said that to Jesus. Is like, hey, and Jesus was like, "No, get behind me, Satan." And it's not so much he called Peter Satan. He that voice that he internally heard was that, right? And I'm sure that all of us felt that. And I think the more we grow into the Word, the more that voice becomes quieted and pushed away from us. So, but I love that story you were saying. And actually, to your point of the hunt, because I always have to say this too, is I know people do have their perspectives on hunting, but I would say it's the purest form of just honoring creation. Yeah. And we know this. How much do you pay for tags a year? Right? Thousands. Like hunters pay millions and millions of dollars to the state, to the federal, overseas for a hunting license. And all that money goes to
Conservation.
Yeah, I didn't even need to say it, Craig. You know that. Yeah. And people don't realize that. It's like the people who hunt the animals.
Not only that, it goes to biologists that manage the animals that say this is how many we need to harvest. So there's a lot that goes into it. I mean, if you look at Africa, the animals that they don't have hunting, there's poachers out there. They don't pay for biologists. There's nobody out there, no game wardens. And those animals are always, those countries are losing a lot of their animals due to poaching. And the ones that have a lot of hunting, their animals thriving over there. They have biologists that are tagging along on the hunt, and they're saying, nope, there's not enough males in this herd. You can't shoot this animal. So
yeah.
So it's this is, I guess it's to just reassure listeners that, hey, hunting is not a bad thing. And the way we actually do it in the States, we are contributing more to conservation of the forest, of the natural habitat, supporting biologists in these studies, and conserving wildlife for the future. Because part of hunting is actually managing and then preserving the animals for our future, for our children and our children's children. Because again, America doesn't have the cleanest history sometimes. We hunted bison almost to extinction.
That's right. Yeah.
And until hunting licenses and conservationists and the Fish and Wildlife Services got a hold of it, we're finally growing the population again. So just a little caveat in that.
Yeah, no, and I think anybody who looks into it and really tries to just look very loosely into hunting will realize that it's a conservation aspect to it incredibly, and it helps in so many facets. So I think, and also if anybody eats meat, I think you might be a little bit of a hypocrite if you weren't to sort of give some respect to it. So I think then, like we said, we've taken a few little twists and turns which are amazing, and really hearing a bit of a story. I know everybody I've ever that knows you, Pham, we call David Pham.
Family.
Family has spoken so highly of you from, not only from just a personal perspective, but a professional perspective. Everybody seems to just see you as the epitome of a Marine when they describe you in your professional work and from when they knew you as in the military. But I wanted to kind of take a bit of a transition to maybe the beginning of your story, and because that had always moved me, hearing how your mum got to the United States and sort of your background.
Yeah.
And that sort of then brings us to another part of the story of how when we first met that first day, that kind of brought us into sort of part of that story too with somebody else we met, which I won't kind of spoil it at this very second. But do you mind taking a quick pivot to how your family got here? And
actually, thanks for asking this, because a lot of people ask me to tell my story, and I can never tell it without telling my mom's story first. And I'm actually proud of it. She is an incredible woman. She's in heaven now, but her story and lineage and legacy has just permeated my life, my sister's life, but also I think everybody around me. Like you can't know me without knowing my mom. So just so proud of that. But the story actually starts, and funny enough, with us being veterans in a war-torn country. She was born in 1958 and in Vietnam. And there's an amazing God story there too. And actually, I'll trace it back there. So I can trace back on when my family became Christians. And I don't think y'all heard this story yet. So there's French colonization of Vietnam, persecution. My grandmother's from Ninh Binh, which is northern Vietnam. And again, that applies later on when it comes with history, right? So the Catholic ministries would come in and they're like, hey, we could save you from this persecution. And we don't need to get into that details, but it wasn't good for the people. As long as you proclaim the name of Christ and become Catholic, we'll move you away and we'll save you from this persecution. So they're like, all right, we'll do it. And at that time, the family tree, they believed in the elders. I gotta look up what the actual faith and religion is, but you basically pray to your elders, right? Elders would pass away, you put their pictures up on the walls, and then you would pray to them for favors and everything else. So at that point, my grandmother and grandfather, who I believe had 4 kids at the time, were like, we got to go. So yeah, sure, we'll become Christians, more specifically Catholics. And they're like, okay, so that was the moment it began. The missionaries put them on a boat, moved them down south. My grandmother runs out there and they're like, hey, this is a property, go find some property in Homestead. Grandmother, being the hustler she is, runs out there with a bunch of sticks, puts sticks in the ground in the middle of the jungle, and basically is like, this is our homestead, and they got a few acres of land. They were granted either money or things that they can use for their new professions by the missionary. And she was like, give me a sewing machine. So they got the sewing machine, they learn how to sew, they start sewing clothes for everyone because nobody had clothes back then, because everything became raggedy, they just moved. They started a small business, they just started building it up. My grandfather becomes the village elder in this Vietnamese village, which, if you know the history of Vietnam and how we fought the war and how, the CAGs moved in there and the civil affairs group and got with the village elders and everything else. So my grandfather became the village elder. My grandmother, was hustling and taking care of the kids. She had 10 kids. My mom was one of 10. And they're fishing, making clothes, running a small business, and everybody respected the family. And then the U.S. came in during the Vietnam War. And being one of more, I don't want to even say affluent because they were living in straw huts, but their house was like on stilts, so there was like a bigger house. So during the war, the U.S. came in there and they actually bombed the house. And the family had to go away. They bombed the house, rebuilt the house 3 times essentially. So this is the environment my mother grew up in. And we always supported the U.S. forces. My grandfather was that old hermit. So he was the village elder, the old hermit. He didn't want to leave the house. So whenever he heard the Viet Cong was coming in, the VC was coming in from the tree line and out of the jungle, he would send the family to the church. So mom, 10 kids, go to the church, hide out. He'd be like, I'm not leaving my house. Sit on the porch, no weapons, but like, I'm not doing anything. So they beat him up. They're like, give us food. They ransacked the house. And then he would just stand up for what he believed in. So he survived kind of that initial push. And then again, the house gets bombed. They rebuilt it. Like it's just it's funny to think about it because looking back as a Marine deployed, I'm like, they probably thought it was an OP, like an observation post, and the U.S. was bombing it. So it was kind of like that's probably what happened. But moving further on in the story, so 1975, And I have an amazing story about Afghanistan that tied to this later too. But in 1975, the U.S. leaves Vietnam. Last helicopter leaves, and you only hope your family was on that helicopter. Well, mine wasn't. My mom, her siblings, parents, or my grandparents, they were all still there. My uncles were all thrown into re-education camps, got beat up, told to pledge allegiance to the Communist Party or we'll kill you type of deal. And so that's the environment my mom grew up in. Like school systems were all a mess, so she didn't really have that. So about 6 years after that, so 1981-ish, my grandmother was able to save up enough money. And she kept trying to pay, essentially coyotes, what we have in the States now, to try to smuggle the kids out of the country. And if you know the geography of Vietnam, you're either going through the jungles and the mountains, which is a high risk, or you're going to the ocean. If you look at boat people, you could see this entire migration of folks out of Vietnam. So 1981, and they've tried a few times already. My uncles and my aunts were all captured and either thrown back in prison or sent back home. So my mom, her sister, and 2 brothers and a few of her nieces and nephews, my cousins, walked 35 miles down to the Mekong Delta, waded into the water, and jumped on this fishing boat and just turned on the engine. They had to hide their money, so they sewed little gold or whatever they had into their clothes. So it was all hidden. So like little pockets of gold or money and whatever it is. The boat starts going east. They're just like, get us out of here. It gets shot up by Vietnamese patrol boats. Engine goes out. They're floating out at sea for 2 weeks. And my mom's 22 at this time, right? So when people talk about this generation, that generation, I'm like, she's 22 years old. And the maturity she had and the resiliency and perseverance she had, and I attribute it to faith as well, right? To be able to do this with her siblings, float out in the ocean. They had a bowl of rice to eat every day, just one bowl of rice. That's all they had. People would pass away on this boat. They would throw them overboard. Pirate ships were hitting them up, taking some of the women and children. So thank God that she was able to avoid that. And eventually a merchant ship, a Thai merchant ship, picked them up. I think they did some bartering or something, but basically towed this boat to the shore. And then they were able to check into a refugee camp, moved over to the Philippines, the island of Bataan. She lived there for a year. And then a humanitarian aid organization paid and sponsored her siblings and a lot of refugees to come to the States, right?
Man.
And we're talking about doing it right. So when she got to the States as a refugee, she wasn't a citizen. So she just had to work. So again, barely any English, no belongings at all. The Catholic Charities and a few other nonprofits supported and gave them clothes and helped them pay for a place to stay before they could start working. She starts working, 2 jobs. And very resilient lady, right? Did everything to survive and gave to her family. Meets my father, has, my sister's born, I'm born. My dad sticks around for a little bit and then he essentially leaves.
Your dad?
My dad, yeah.
How old were you?
I would say around really about 8 years old, where he actually, maybe 7 or 8, where he actually was gone. And he would check in every now and then and just kind of like, hey, I'm here. And growing up as a kid, you don't know that dad wasn't there. You don't know that mom was a single mom because as a kid, you just see, oh, dad's here for the weekend. And then he would leave. And then, dad's taking us to wherever, amusement park. He's getting us toys. And, it's a story of forgiveness, which I'll kind of address that later. But as a kid, you just don't know. When I became a man, I was like, oh, he wasn't there. Mom did this. She raised us by herself. We were on food stamps, Section 8, subsidized housing, Section 8, welfare. Like we had to live off the government for so long. And the thing I was so proud of my mom with, she worked 2 jobs, went to school to be a cosmetologist, eventually did nails, which is, stereotypical, but it was what they could do. It was like, hey, Vietnamese lady doing nails. There's a whole history behind that. But yeah, she was able to get a job and provide it for us. And when I was 13 years old, we got off government subsidies. And if this is like talking to Americans or talking to refugees or immigrants or whatever audience sees this, like Like those programs are designed to help people get on their feet,
Get a step up.
but to not live off of.
Yeah, totally.
And I will say that from a guy who's eaten government cheese, literally government cheese, and we went to the food bank. We got food out of the back of a truck. Like that's where I thought groceries came from. Like for the longest time was like these people just giving me boxes of food, right? Yeah. So yeah, from a guy who grew up in that, it's just a stepping stone. You need to take ownership, and it's all about, and part of being a Christian is like, yeah, you have to take ownership for the gifts God gives you. My mom worked her butt off to get off these subsidies, and we did. And she bought her own house. She bought her first house.
Praise
By
God.
herself. Praise God.
Yeah.
Praise God. With my sister helping, and it was funny. Again, being a mother who spoke broken English, everybody loved her. Like even if the language wasn't there, people loved Mary. And actually, Mary is her chosen name. So her name is Pham, and love her, and love her name. Beautiful. It means fragrance. But she chose Mary as her name because of Christ. So that was like her chosen name on. But so everybody loved Mary. But yeah, she didn't speak English. And as a kid growing up, talking about a little bit of my childhood, I remember we moved. I was born in California, but I grew up in Savannah, Georgia. At 9 years old, I think the Spirit spoke to her looking back. She chose to pick up the family and move us to Savannah to where our uncle was. Our neighborhood in California was getting bad. Looking back, a lot of my childhood friends in elementary school joined gangs, used drugs, and they're climbing out now, which I love. But I think my mom somehow felt the Spirit moved us away, and that changed my life. But I remember during that time I was 9 years old, and I had to rent the U-Haul for my mom as a 9-year-old. Like I remember this very.
You rented the U-Haul?
I rented the U-Haul. No, I love this memory. And again, it's not me. There's no way a kid could do that. Like the Spirit was working through me, right? And she took us to the U-Haul place, and she's like, "We need this big size, right?" And I was like, "Okay." So I'm talking to the lady. It's like 9-year-old kid, mom behind me, and I'm not even translating. I'm like speaking for her at this point. So I'm like, "Yeah, we need this U-Haul." She's like, "Okay, I need you." She's like looking at me funny. She's like, "You need to sign this." Like, "Mom, sign." "Okay, we need a credit card." "Okay, here, mom, credit card." And then eventually like rented this U-Haul for her. And my sister, she was able to save up enough for my sister to fly over to link up with my uncle to try to register us for school and be ready. Because we were jumping right into school the next week. My mom and I jump in this U-Haul. We hired a driver, like just a family friend. And we're like, "Hey, here's a couple $100. Can you drive us across the country?" Took us 3 days as a 9-year-old kid in a U-Haul, sleeping in the front seat with my mom. Do
you remember this journey well?
It does, yeah. It gets me teary-eyed talking about it just because of the adversity that she had to experience to give us the life that she knew that we should have or try to get us, right? And again, my dad wasn't around during this journey, and we drove 3 days across the country.
With a stranger.
With a stranger that we paid. So cutting through. So by 9, I was like, I've driven through Texas, Arizona. Like I was like, I read these stories. I read about these states in a book, right, in the textbook, and got to live it. So I think at an early age, I was able to see a lot and experience a lot and realize that people were the same no matter where you went. There was good people and there was bad people. It doesn't matter what color you were. It doesn't matter what dialect you spoke or what twang you had in your voice. Like I was like, people are the same, and there's gonna be good ones and bad ones, right? So I got to experience that as a 9-year-old. Drove across the country in this U-Haul. Get registered for school. Jumping from a California school to a Southern school was absolutely different for me. And the neighborhood we grew up in, which is so important to address, is it was definitely a mixed batch. And again, nothing against the childhood, but I grew up in a neighborhood full of a lot of immigrants coming up from Mexico, Guatemala, and California, right? So my elementary school was all Spanish speaking. Things were almost bilingual. We had, I think, maybe 3 white people in my class or 3 white kids in my class and maybe 1 black kid in the 4 years I was there, like that I experienced to hang out with. And I moved to Savannah, and it was like total opposite, right? And the culture was different. The school I was at was a magnet school, so they essentially pulled kids from different neighborhoods just to make the school a little bit more diverse. So I got to experience a lot of just different cultures there. And the thing that I love so much is the Southern culture is exactly like Vietnamese culture.
Is it really?
It's food,
Yeah, oh, yeah.
It's family
Yeah.
and sitting around and talking and
Yeah.
jabbing and just building relationships and having fun. And so that's why I think I fit in so well. But I think what was so profound for me, which led to my journey in the Marine Corps, was heard country music for the first time, which is awesome. Like, loved it. Heard my first Christian song for the first time, not knowing how to react to that. I was like, oh, that's it was like Christian rock. North to the South by Delirious was the first song I ever heard. So I distinctly remember that. It didn't mean anything to me though, right? I grew up Catholic. My mom was devout, believed in Christ, believed in Savior, just very devoted to the faith. And that's how I grew up, which kind of, everybody has their path. For me, I grew more so into kind of the non-denominational later on and found faith in a different way and separated religion and faith. But, growing up Catholic really gave me a good foundation of just like, there's a God, this person named Jesus came down to give his life for you. And, there's right and wrong, right? Like, I think that it gave me the foundation to at least grow that. And everybody's gonna have their journey. And I battled that for a while too. But so got to experience all this growing up in the South. And played sports for the first time. Organized sports. I actually didn't make my middle school soccer team, and I was like, oh, best thing could ever happen to me. But didn't make it, was kind of like, nah, whatever. And turned off the sports for a bit. And then going into high school, I wanted to give football a try. And that was absolutely transformative. Some of my football brothers that I grew up kind of in the hood area are my brothers now. They were at my wedding. I would do anything for them, and I know they'd do anything for me. But some of the relationships I built at that time was so formative. And again, this time still, growing up Section 8, food stamps, welfare, it became almost like a class thing instead of just even a skin color thing. So, and culturally, I fit in. It was great, and I was able to. And I thank people a lot for this, to even just welcoming me into their little small tribes. But I almost say I was able to kind of walk through walls a little bit, where I was able to experience, the Southern Black culture, Southern white culture, academia, right? Like there's these, like I met some people at church that were like these rich people, which I didn't even know it could be this level of wealth growing up. I was like, that's pretty amazing. So growing up in the South was so amazing for me because I was able to experience all these amazing, loving cultures and see that you don't need to come from a certain background to share love and gratitude. And that kind of helped guide me towards college. So played football, eventually senior year, captain, and then wrestled as well. So captain wrestling team. That transformed my life. Wrestling and organized and football changed my path. And I think that's where God was really, not knowing it then, was the Spirit was driving me towards what I needed to do. I wanted to serve and give back. Halfway through high school, I had this revelation. I just woke up one day and was like, I'm going to serve. And growing up, like we watched the war movies and everything else, and it kind of just stuck with me. And looking at some old photos, I was wearing like a G.I. Joe shirt. But again, it meant nothing to me until the Spirit calls you to do it. And I guess that's sometimes applies to us in life as well, right? Like we could get all these clues, but until it's your right time and the Spirit's like, go do this, then it's time to do it. Actually, so when I wanted to join, great advice, go talk to all the recruiters. Yeah, right. Go to the Air Force. Again, love the Air Force, but they was like, hey, cool. Kind of shut the door on me. I'm like, all right, see you later. Navy was like, all right, read this brochure, come back later. Army, same thing. And this was 2005, so we were kind of, talking about funny coincidence. You were grinding your teeth in the Marine Corps and deploying in combat, and I was just taking a peek at what I wanted to do in life. The Marine Corps was like, hey, come on in, brother, right? We're not going to recruit you, but if you want to be part of us, you're going to have to sacrifice. And the whole recruiting crew or spiel, but essentially, it was almost like I had to earn the right to be a Marine. I was like, this is what I want. And the wrestling, the football, everything else was just helped me make that decision. Came home, told my mom, again, background, Vietnamese refugee, witnessed horrific scenes as a child. I mean, dead bodies, everything. So, you could only guess what she said when I told her I want to be a Marine.
Yeah, for sure.
She was like, no. And I think if she cursed, she would have thrown an F no in there. But it was definitely no. For 3 weeks, and it was just me and her in the house. My sister was off at college. For 3 weeks, she didn't talk to me. I am not exaggerating.
Silent treatment.
It was like literally get home from school, get home from football practice, dinner's on the table. And I'm like, hey mom, she's like, this is it. 3 weeks. And finally, like, I think she just got tired of me just like coming home that way. And then she finally started speaking with me, right? So like, you know, and it's hard, sad to think about. Like, I think to a certain extent, I broke my mom's heart, telling her I wanted to serve, right? She wanted me, you know, typical, and I say this very endearingly, like Vietnamese parent, right? Lawyer, doctor, something to make money and take care of your family. I'm like, I want to be a Marine. Like, I want to go defend this nation and possibly die because you've seen it, right? And I know it probably hurt her heart for a while, and but she was eventually supportive, and you know, gets to this point. It's like, what can I do to help? Like, do I need to feed you more? Do you need to get bigger? Like, it's just, and eventually sends me off. And one thing she always said is, I've committed you to Christ. Like, I've given you to Christ. My mom told me this, and she's like, your life's not mine to keep and maintain. Like, I have given you away, and God has you now. And I was like, as a high schooler, like, how do you take that?
Yeah, right.
I was like, that is a weird thing to say. And I got it, and I was like, okay, cool, that's like her faith thing. But looking back, I'm like, wow, for a mom to say that, of like, hey, your life's no longer mine. Mm-hmm. I brought you into this world, but you are a follower of Christ, and you are gonna, whatever happens is gonna happen. You know, and she literally said, she's like, if you die, like, it's gonna be, you know, I know Christ has you. And I'm like, wow. You know, it was an interesting thing to hear from your mom, especially as a high school kid. But you know, and that's, you know, funny. When I left for college, I eventually got the scholarship to go to college from the Marine Corps, so we couldn't pay for college. I didn't address that as the only way I could pay for college, and that's the one thing she's like, you have to go to college. The Marine Corps was my way to pay for college. Sure, I could have gotten scholarships and everything else, but one, it just wasn't what God put on my spirit. It was never part of my personality to be, you know, super academically sound. My sister's incredible. That was her path. You know, I think people paid her to go to college because of, you know, her academic prowess. But for me, I'm more of the wrestler, football player, break through a brick wall type of guy. So had to find a way to pay for college. Marine Corps was the avenue. So yeah, ended up going to Georgia Tech. And I would say there was when my faith journey grew and matured into something, or it really set the foundation for where I am now in my faith. The book that brought me there was The Shack. I had a couple of buddies who was like, you should read The Shack. Have y'all read it yet, the book?
You know, I haven't. You gave it to me. And I have to admit, I can't lie. It's a Christian show.
Yeah. So you did read it?
And I saw the movie, yeah.
And it's
He gets 10 points.
It's heart-wrenching.
Yeah.
It is. And I can see both of you as fathers. And I don't want to spoil it because it's very impactful. But the first 3 chapters, if you can make it through that as a father, the rest of the book will really help you. You know, and you know, there are some different perspectives in there. So take it for what it is as a Christian book, and a great movie. But basically, a father goes through the most unimaginable atrocity that you can imagine that can happen to one of your children. And then he goes through this journey where he meets Christ, he meets the Holy Spirit, he meets God, and he has to learn forgiveness. And what I learned from that book was God expects us to love our enemies, right? How do you do that? A lot of people question that. There's been studies and dissertations, theological dissertations on that one phrase of how do you love your enemy? For me, that book really helped it because eventually Mac, the character in the book, had to find a way to forgive, and beyond that, even love the person and pray for the person that hurt him and his family to the core, right? It transformed it. And, you know, we've been to Pursuit, and we talked about something called a mercy seat and being able to pray for the person who hurt you. So as a young 20-year-old, what I took away from that was my relationship with my father. Not actually my biological father, right? And again, growing up, nothing crazy. as a childhood before he left, some verbal abuse here and there, but the abandonment that I felt as a man, and looking back and be like, man, he left us. Like this guy, as charismatic and as incredible as some folks said he was, he also chose to leave my mom and my sister and me to fend for ourselves, right? So how do I love this human being? And because of the book, because of the faith, and all the brothers around me, it taught me how to do that. And the thing I really pull from that is, you don't have to like the person that you love, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a weird thing to say. So the Bible tells us, love your enemy. Okay, so I love you. I love you as a brother in Christ. I love you as just a brother, that a creation of God, a child of Christ, actually is a better way to put it. I love you as a child of God. That doesn't mean you need to like them or be around them, because they may be toxic. They may be bringing you down. They may be at a point in their lives where the enemy has a hold on their spirit, and they're going to bring you and your family down. So there has to be a certain point where you cut the ties with them, but that doesn't change your love for them, and sympathy and empathy and compassion you have for this person. And you don't have to even like them. Like you don't need, but in my heart, from that book and from our faith, I've learned to love that person, because you do feel for them. And Craig, talking to you and your experience here with fighting an enemy, a real enemy, who's actually shooting at you, right? So whenever I became a Marine, deployed and fought, that's the struggle that I was dealing with, right? It's, okay, this person, God's telling me to love this person who just shot at us, blew us up, and actually took the life of the brothers that I love. And Christ is telling me to love them. Like, how do I do that? And again, back to the book, right? I empathize with them, right? I understand. They were just born in the wrong zip code. I had to say that, right? Imagine any of us born in that area, under those same conditions, under those same sufferings, without the teachings of Christ, without exposure to Christ's love, we have a higher probability of going down that same path.
Wow. Yeah, for sure.
Of being a paid terrorist.
Yeah.
Right? So what's for me to judge that? And yeah, he's shooting at us. They're shooting at us for money or for whatever, but whatever the situation is, I'm still going to do the Marine thing. I'm still going to be a Marine infantry officer. I'm still going to protect the innocent, still put myself and my brothers in front of the innocent women and children and shield them, and still accomplish the mission and attack the enemy and get rid of this evil. But that doesn't change my compassion and sympathy and empathy for these people. Like, I feel so bad for them. I feel such hurt for them. And to be honest, that book in college transformed my faith, planted the seeds for me to have this perspective on the enemy that we're told to love. So,
I mean, that's powerful, man, because
yeah,
this whole concept of loving those that abuse you or loving those that want to kill you. And I think that a lot of people listening should let that settle in, because I mean, it is a big part of American culture that we see, that I think there's this hardness towards those that do wrong to us. And it makes sense, somebody hurts you, you want to get them back, you want to protect. And there's nothing wrong with protecting, like you're saying, but and there's nothing wrong with defending, but at the same time, Christ said, love your enemies. Yeah. And so actually it kind of transitions to something we were talking about earlier that really moved me when I heard this story, but I kind of wanted to give it to you to talk about it, because I know you guys have had such a connection in Marine Corps, and this whole concept of, being a Christian in everything you're doing. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think to hit on that and actually talk about our relationship, I'd like to talk about that too, and I think it'll lead into this, is the darkness that we kind of mentioned earlier, right? And how Craig, and I say this about a lot of my brothers, Craig saved my life, right? Love you, brother, for it. I'm going to say that. And again, it's not attributed to you. The Spirit used you. Z saved my life. My brothers in combat saved my life. My sisters that I have, my sister, biological, like Kathy, she saved my life. There's a lot of people that God has put in my life to really save them. And I mean that in every bit of the sense of I should not be here. And I'll kind of start off with hunting saved my life. You know, I hit that earlier. So my mom passed away in 2016. And again, I was struggling. We lost some brothers in combat, right? Eugene Mills, Stephen Sutton, Eric Warren, love him to death. But you know, it was kind of part of the job. And as painful and as much as they sit with me, we all knew what contract we were signing. And you know, I still reach out to the families and try to do it. But I think we've all accepted the fact that when we step on those yellow footprints and we step on that plane and we cross the line of departure, there's some consequences of some of that action. So some of that we were expecting. Even with my mom, she passed away in 2016 of leukemia. We had 3 years to fight it together, and we fought. She fought majestically. We got to live life. We went back to Vietnam. She got to see her mom for the last time, my grandmother. So even that loss was, it was absolutely the hardest thing that I've ever experienced up to this point in my life, but also still understandably was able to accept it. And then after the fact, I actually went on a walkabout through Israel. I walked 57 miles from Nazareth to Capernaum. Probably a story for another day, but definitely felt God in the promised land. And you know, as Christians, we don't need to see to believe. Like you don't need to be able to see the Holy Land and Promised Land to actually be a Christian and be saved. But when you do see it, you just have an interesting, different perspective of Christ and the things that he saw in life, right? So going through all that trauma, like things, I was okay relatively. Like, you know, I suffered some sadness and everything, but it wasn't really a crash. What got me though, so I would say I'm very blessed with a successful career up until 2019, and even still now. But in 2019, top of my game, company commander. So for those who don't know, I was in charge of 200 Marines. I was making my own decisions. I owned my own battle space. We deployed down to the border to help border patrol and did some amazing things down there as well. Top of my game. People were like, you're gonna promote to this, you're gonna do that. They had visions for my career. And I was doing good, I was doing okay. I was in a relationship with somebody I thought I was gonna marry. So get back from that deployment down to the southwest border, and within the span of 3 weeks, talking about coincidence or God or whatever it is, span of 3 weeks, I was told that I found out I was being promoted. So they had to move me out of my billet, my role as a company commander. So that you essentially take me away from what I believe was my purpose, was to lead Marines in whatever environment. I was no longer in the field because with the moving into a higher role and of a higher rank, you're sitting behind a desk. So now you take away what I believe was my purpose to fight, and now you put me behind a desk. I'm removed from the tribe because you can't just sit as a company commander. So my 200 Marines, they move on and they have a new company commander, and then I'm put behind a desk. And within the same 3 weeks of me finding all this out, the woman that I thought I was going to marry decides she's just going to disappear. Like, calls me up out of the blue. Things are fine. We're talking about getting married. And she's like, hey, we need to take a break. And I was like, hey, what does that even mean? And the reality was, I don't think she had the ability to say, like, I need a break. She's like, I just need to take a break. Ends up, disappearing, essentially. Try to reach out, try to mend things. She did not even a chance to do anything about it. So she disappears. So I start spiraling, find out later on, like, she's dating a colleague, and it was just like very hurtful, like things that were just kept stabbing me.
Your whole world's crashing
down. My whole world's crashing down.
Yeah.
I was top of my game, company commander, looking to promote, like everything else. And then a really good friend brought this up when I was kind of venting to him, and he's like, Dave, you lost your identity. Like you lost what you saw as your identity.
Your thought was your identity, that's right.
Which is really important to put it that way. What I thought was my identity. You lost what you called family, which was this person I thought I was gonna marry. you've lost your profession, or you thought it was your profession, your purpose in life was to be a Marine and to lead in combat. And then you lost purpose, or you lost your tribe essentially. So purpose, tribe. So family, purpose, and tribe was what I kind of identified as. And those are all the people and it was incredible. But I lost all the brothers, they moved on. I was sitting behind a desk away from my purpose, and I was coming home to a dark apartment every day. So in 2019, on 2 occasions, and I've shared this story kind of within the circles, but since we're here and we prayed over this, and I think hopefully it'll help somebody and speak to somebody. So imagine this guy who you think lives this perfect life, gets paid money, lives on the beach in San Clemente, California, Marine officer, top of his game. And as all this happened within those 3 weeks, it almost felt like Job, right? Go back to that book. But 2019, I pulled my gun out for the first time, cleaned it off, and was just like looking at it. And was just like contemplating and thinking through, would I be able to take my own life? And what the enemy was telling me was, yeah, it's easier, bro. Just knock it out. And guess what? On top of that, this other, the person that left you would probably hear about it, and like you'll hurt them too.
These are the thoughts.
These are like just the enemy just talking about these
arrows,
thoughts,
darts.
these arrows, these darts just coming at you. And to your point, we talked about this earlier. My faith I was going to church. I mean, I had church, faith. I was, Jesus calling every day. It was just, I was strong in my faith, but often we found out that the enemy attacks God's warriors, right? The other the folks who are kind of struggling, that's not what the enemy's worried about. He's worried about folks who are going to make more Christians. The enemy attacks the strong. He's not worried about the folks who aren't going to move God's kingdom, right? He's going to find those warriors that has potential, and then those are the ones he's going to attack. So I think, in hindsight, that's probably what was happening, or I know that's what was happening. And took a look at the gun in July 2019. I remember that. Put it away. Kind of thought in the back of my head. Moved down a few months. Still trying to find ways to mend this relationship. And what was unhealthy for me was I was putting all my purpose into like, if I could mend things with this person, then things would be all good again, right? But she has her own life, she has everything else. So still spiraling into darkness. December rolls around, to find out more things and just that was the time where I pulled the gun out again. And this time I went condition 3 on it, which Craig knows. Condition 3 on a weapon is rounds and rounds and magazine inserted, no round in chamber. But at the time I already, it was my Glock 19, and the trigger was cocked. So I just wanted to feel. I think what's going through my head, that I was like, just feel what it feels like to pull the trigger. So put the gun up to my head and pulled the trigger on an empty chamber, thankfully. But as soon as I did that, talking about God's miracles, like I literally just had flashes of my nieces and my family and how people I love would have felt if I was gone. And then, no kidding, a couple hours, it might have been 30 minutes, an hour later, Z calls me. Wow. Just out of the, hey Dave, how you doing? I'm like, not good. So imagine that, like, a lot of times we get the Spirit calling us to do something, and sometimes we just don't do it. And not saying we're wrong for not doing it. God just gave you an opportunity to do something. So whatever spoke to Z to call me at that time on that day was able to be like, hey Dave, how you doing, man? I'm here for you. I love you, dude. And that really saved my life, right? And I was very close to death there. And the struggle didn't stop there. Like, people think like, oh, you have this amazing God moment, right? No, like, I struggled for the next several years, just still battling, still justifying, trying to find my faith in Christ. And and then I deployed again. That's when I had I went to Kuwait, and then we're doing missions. My guys are doing missions out of Syria and Iraq and everything else. So I went through this whole deployment still struggling with this battle. And the thoughts, and those who have struggled with this, I would say, like, thoughts of suicide the thought stays with you unless you find something to replace the thought. And I really had to dive into my faith to find that. And it was really faith, purpose, and tribe was what really pulled me out of that, and to prevent those thoughts from coming back, to prevent the enemy's darts from attacking again. So went through that craziness, went on deployment, and the entire time saving up money. Because so I met Craig the year prior, just because Z invited me up, and it was a miracle there. But we connected right away. It was just, and we knew, we worked a little bit together, but pretty far removed. I was the aide for a general, and he was down with recon. So we met each other a few times, but that's really about it. But we really started connecting up here, and I'm sure you had your side of the faith when we met there too. But I wanted to save up because I wanted to go hunting up here. You know, Craig runs an amazing outfitter, and wanted to save up and come and just fellowship. And what I've said in the past, I learned that hunting saved my life in 2016. Really, because hunting provided something that would save a life. Because what it did was it helped me deal with trauma. Hunting brings you out into the wilderness again, and especially for veterans. So hunting brings you out into the wilderness. You're hiking around with a heavy pack. You have a gun in your hands. You're actually actively hunting for a living thing, right? Except this time it's for an animal and not a person. But also whenever you pull the trigger, I remember the first time I ever pulled a trigger on an animal, and my palms were sweaty. Like I had buck fever. It was nuts. I was shaking, and it felt like combat. And everything, I tasted the gunpowder. Like it was just, and you could breathe it in, and that moment was like, wow, this is combat. Like anybody who's hunted has a small taste of it. The only difference is you don't have rounds coming back at you. But at that moment, I was like, oh, if I keep doing this, it's going to help me deal with some of the stress, because what comes out of it is not atrocities of war, it's a harvest. And feeding your family, and you know, this animal giving up its life to feed your family. So hunting has all the traits of combat, but it ends with an amazing harvest afterwards. So for me, the more I did that, the more it helped pull that trauma away. So after this deployment, I was like, I need to go to Craig. I need to set up a hunt with him. And when I said like the hunt saved my life, and we kind of hinted at it earlier, was Craig didn't know any of this. None of the guys knew this. And I was transitioning, you know, to the reserves at that point. So I was active duty, right? And then transitioning to reserves, still struggling with this. And again, we took that shot where I was like, that's a guaranteed shot. Chip shot is easy. And then, you know, God moved the bullet for me to just spend time with my brothers. And being 3 days in a blind with Z and Craig, and a lot of veterans don't talk about their trauma or their experiences, because I think a lot of civilians, we feel that a lot of civilians can't relate to that. But when you put 3 veterans together who've had similar experiences and chewed the same dirt, you're going to open up. And then to even tell a story about that is, you know, I've talked to a few Vietnam veterans and World War II guys, humbled standing next to them, and they'll start venting, telling these stories, and their families are like, yeah, he's never said that to anybody. And he's opening his heart. So I think it's so critical for us, and that's why Light in the Wilderness is so important, is because it opens the door for like-minded individuals, either veterans or hunters, to be in the same room, or I guess on the same hike or hunt, and then you're able to just vent to each other, because you know that this person in front of me is going to understand and empathize and respect my opinion on that, right? And so that kind of really sparked our brotherhood and fellowship, and I think at that point we really knew, like, oh, we're equally yoked in faith, and God is putting us in each other's lives for a reason. And I think, you know, to kind of hint at the story that you were telling, I think Craig's story is critical in this. But after that moment, and you know, experiencing all that, I knew that Craig was a brother forever, brother in Christ, and same with you, Blaze. And I've said this. I remember saying it at Pursuit, was like, you know, until the day we die, is like we're going to be brothers forever in Christ. And it's really, there's no other bond besides that. But that was kind of the start of it, and I think it was really what really forged it was what happened with Davey. But to keep things anonymous, we'll just call him Davey, which again is a coincidence that this person's name is Davey and my name's David. But Craig, you got to tell your side of the story of this because it's.
So just to recap this story, which was I was at a pivotal point in my career, right? I felt I got called to ministry, so I basically prayed and fasted, and I felt the Lord say to keep my business. And David was my first hunter I had of the season. And so normally in the off season, we run our place on Airbnb, our cabin and all that stuff. So anyway, we take it off of Airbnb. We're getting all ready. The lodge is prepped for our first hunt, deer season, David. And my wife comes outside and says, hey, someone just booked the cabin on Airbnb. I'm like, what do you mean someone just booked the cabin on Airbnb? She's like, I don't know, I blocked it off and Airbnb made a mistake. And so I'm like stressed out right now. And my wife's like, don't worry about it. We'll make it work. We'll put.
Well, I'll jump here. So I was going to bring my whole family up. Right. So we were going to book the cabin, the lodge. I was going to bring the in-laws up. Natalie's grandfather was an elk hunter back in the day, an old cowboy from Texas. And I was like, this is going to be great. Like he'll come and we could try to hunt out here as a family. And
I forgot about that.
Yeah. So that was the whole thing. They canceled last minute because, just family and health and everything else. So they canceled, which
allowed the cabin to be open. Even though it was blocked off Airbnb, we were going to put David and his fiance at the cabin.
Yeah.
And so anyway, my wife's like, just let's roll with it, whatever. We'll make it work. We'll put David and his fiance in the lodge. We'll use the cabin for the renters, and we could use the income. We'll make it work. So I'm kind of frustrated by this. And anyway, that night when we were going to bed, my wife goes, I don't know what it is, but I feel in my spirit that God's going to do something with this. Like the cabin's blocked off on Airbnb and then blocked itself for this family. So anyway, the next day, David shows up, his fiance, we're hanging outside, and this family pulls in this van to the cabin, and it's an Asian family. Yeah. And we're in Brownville, Maine. And I'm joking around with David. I said, hey, with your family, you bring your family up here now? Are they coming? And so anyway, this dude gets out of the car. He's this Jack guy, probably mid-40s, beautiful family, children. And we waved him over, and I just said, hey.
Well, on that, though, I mean, huge point. Usually you don't talk to your
normally I don't talk to the renters. I don't see them. There's really no interaction.
You let them rent.
Let them rent. They rent on their vacation. It's exactly. So.
And the vision I had there, because I was standing on the back porch looking at like the sunset with you, and we see them walking, and something the Spirit moved us, and we're just like, "Hey, Davey," or it's like, "Hey, man, how you doing?" And then there was a pause there, and it was Craig was like, "Come on up." And that's what pulled him up there. So again, we're talking about the Spirit moving like that.
Yeah. So anyway, the guy came over, and I just introduced myself. Hey, I'm the owner. We got everything here. Just want to let you know that it's hunting season. We're going to be doing some hunts here. I'm not sure how you guys feel about this. They're coming from the city, and we just let them know, hey, we might be shooting some deer. Don't know how you feel about this. And the guy's like, what? You got a hunting outfit? I didn't know you guys do that here. And I said, well, he's like, do you care if you guys get something? Would you mind if I come over to the game pole and check it out? We're like, no, not at all. So we introduced ourselves. His name's Davey.
Yeah.
We got David, Davey. He has a daughter named Emma. I have a daughter named Emma. He had a puppy with him. I had a puppy. Basically, their family is from Vietnamese. His Cambodian, Vietnamese. Mom was a refugee to America. David's mom's a refugee. Both their moms died around the same time. So all this like weird coincidental stuff was taking place. So anyway, we go off on our hunt. We come back. David kills this beautiful buck. We bring it back to the pole, and this guy comes over who's also a police officer, right? He's a police officer in a big city, big city. And comes over, and he's checking this animal. He's like, wow, look at this. Hey, can you take a picture of me? So we're doing all these pictures and stuff, and he's like, I got to send this to my buddy, who's my mentor in the police department. And so anyway, he's asking us, how do we know each other? And we're like, yeah, we were in the Marine Corps together. And he's like, no way. He's like, my mentor is a prior Marine. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And David goes, what's his name? And the guy says his name, like Joe Schmo, whatever. And
then
Dave's like 6'2", blonde hair, blue eye, Joe Schmo. And this guy's like, there's no way you know this guy. He goes, bro, I was his company commander in combat. And he goes, better yet, I got his number on my phone, and pulls his phone out and FaceTimes him. So this guy answers the phone, and he's like, Captain Pham, what's going on? He's like, hey, brother, look who I'm with, and shows the phone to this police officer. And this police officer's dumbfounded, like, like gob stopped. And so anyway, they start talking on the phone. He's like, how do you know this person? So anyway, they're doing all their talk. And anyway, the guy on the phone says to the police officer, he goes, David is my mentor. He goes, I'm your mentor. David is my mentor. So anyway, God was doing something there. So just an amazing time. Anyway, fast forward the next day. We're like, dude, God's doing something here. Basically, my cabin's blocked off an Airbnb. It unblocked itself. All this coincidental stuff, Vietnamese, refugee, Marine Corps, mutual friends. So David said, let's take some of my deer meat. Let's grill it up, and then we're going to invite him over. And let's just share our testimony with this guy to see what happens. So at the same time, Blaze comes over.
Meet Blaze for the first time.
Blaze for the first time.
You and I.
We tell him what's going on. We kind of read him in on what's going on. So we invite the guy over, and we start sharing our testimony with this guy. And this guy's starting to get kind of moved a little bit. And he looks down and says, he goes, I posted on the internet the other day that everything happens for a reason. And he looks at me and says, we didn't originally book your cabin on Airbnb. Now, this guy had no clue that the cabin was blocked off on Airbnb and unblocked itself. Basically just said, he goes, we didn't book your cabin on Airbnb. He goes, we booked another cabin, and right before we left for our vacation, the Airbnb owner called us and said, there's been a mistake, we're overbooked, you can't come here. And he said, we went back on the computer and we logged back into Airbnb, and he goes, and your cabin just showed up on our screen.
It was the only one that popped up.
It was the only one that popped up. He didn't look for it, it just popped up. So he booked it. Now, I remember the chills that we were all feeling at that time. I'm telling you, like every hair on my body was standing up. And Blaze looks over and goes, bro, do you believe in God?
Which is,
and he said, yeah, I'm Hindu or whatever it was. Buddhist. And he's like, no, Christ. And then we explained to him, we said, man, this cabin was blocked off on Airbnb. That night, my wife said, I feel something in my spirit that God's doing something with this. So it unblocked itself for you to come here. Bro, there's a reason why you're sitting in this room among three believers telling you about Christ. What's going on in your life? And I remember that guy started getting...
He was, I would say, like at that point, he was kind of quiet because it didn't happen until later. I don't know if it's that evening or the next day. He was kind of quiet, just soaking it up, right? And y'all did an incredible job of just, not be overbearing, but just like, hey, this is our life and this is why, we feel so blessed. But we're sitting around the fire, and I kind of stepped away with him, and we're just walking and talking, and I think we're checking on the meat. And he's like, hey, dude, last week I was in front of my Buddhist altar, and I had my gun out. And again, remember, I just told you the story about my situation. So
and he didn't know that story.
He didn't know the story at all of what we just talked about. So he's like, yeah, I was in front of my Buddhist altar and I pulled my gun out and I really thought about ending it right there. And my relationship struggling and everything else. And I was like, well, we're here for you, brother. I mean, that's the only thing I can say. Not even, it's like, we're here for you. You're here for a reason, like you posted. We'll pray for you and everything else. And that's why I brought you two back into the fold of this conversation. But that moment was huge.
And how easy we could have missed that moment, right? So anyway, here's this family who's struggling with suicide, where the husband is, right? And then God does something amazing, and how easy we could have missed that, right? How easy it could have been for, I told my wife, hey, call him up, let him know, hey, we're done, or he could have showed up, but we didn't wave him over, right? That's right. And we fellowship with him, and then you fed him a meal. And then as uncomfortable as it was, we shared Christ with him. And
uncomfortable, that's a good word. I mean, it was a struggle.
Right? And it's sometimes you're plowing, you're planting the seed, and it's not, But anyway, being obedient, we shared our testimony and what came out of it, right? So here it is a family who was just looking to get away, looking for a place to escape. And they found the cabin that was blocked off on Airbnb that unblocked itself so their family could come here so we could tell them about Christ.
And the big thing I'll tell y'all too is, it's the Spirit that moves a person, but we have the responsibility of accepting the duty to do that. And I believe he told y'all, like, hey, I want to accept Christ, right? Like, I think before he left, he was a conversation with one of you. He was like, yeah, I want to accept Christ. And I think that was so beautiful because, he did go through some struggles later on, but I think without that moment.
And you stayed in contact with him.
And I did, yeah. So that was the amazing blessing there. Is just staying in contact, sending that brother check every now and then. Police, military, we're all the same. It's just, God gives us these moments. And, and I have to say this because I love this part of the story because I was the one that was talking to you and Libby about it.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're going to say.
Yeah, and it's like, I was like, hey, you want to say it?
No, just back to my pivotal point in my career, right, where I'm thinking, God wants me to sell this or keep it. So I fasted. I felt to keep my business, right? So it's a big decision. And after this guy leaves, David looks at me and goes, yeah, he said, are you sure you wanted to sell your business?
Like, hey,
what'd you say?
I was like, hey, you still want to sell it?
Yeah, you still want to sell your business. That's what it was. And
and to give a
so
little
it's just
more,
another, and it was just another, answer from the Lord. Like you're right where you need to be. This is your business, what I gave you. So,
and to give a little more context for people listening is that so this had been a journey for you, Craig, kind of preparing to sell your land. I mean, you put it on the market. You were in this place where you're like, hey, I'm really going to sell this thing and move into another realm. And you actually, even in that, you were telling me all the time, like, when I sell this, I'll have a lot more time and freedom on my hands, and I'll go out and be doing more service for God. Like you had planned to do ministry outside of that. And so it's so funny that, like, there you are, like, man, and then we were like, I just wish God would just show me. And there was so many conversations you and I had in that time. And God's like, well, it's right in front of you. But it was sort of like, in essence, you giving up this thing that you have built, this incredible property and everything, and it's now sort of like God's like, well, I'm giving it back to you to go and do this new work, and in that's the fingerprint, the wink of God, as you said before, like of all of it just coming together, and in that saving souls, bringing testimonies and bringing brothers together. So I got to witness it as well from a number of different perspectives, and just seeing how God really just He'll speak to us. And I think anybody listening, it's like I said at the beginning of the conversation, which is we have to keep reminding ourselves and thinking, hey, how is God involved in this? What's He doing there? Yeah. And I think a lot of times, I think it's so easy in the life that we have here in the United States, everybody, rich and poor, that we have so many freedoms. We have busyness, but we have so many freedoms. We've got everything going on in front of us. We've got family to take care of. We've got all these different opportunities in front of us, that it's so simple to just pursue what you want and really not think anything else of it. But it's that moment where we maybe even not slowing down, but just allow the Holy Spirit to speak to us in that still small voice and be like, hey, just wave to that guy, bring him over, say hi.
Because how many opportunities have we missed? Because we're trying to get from point A to point B. There's someone that comes in and interrupts you in your timeline. And you're just like, I got to get this. And that might have been a divine appointment that God had for you and that person that we miss.
And that reminds me so much of the 4 types of soil that Christ talks about, producing the harvest, right? So it's like the soil is seeded with the Word of God, and there are these 4 types of soil, and there's only 4 types that are mentioned in the scriptures, right, that produce a harvest. But all the things leading up to the production of a harvest, meaning the 36 or 100-fold, one of the main ones, the biggest ones ultimately, where you get so close to producing a harvest but don't, is money and things. It says that the cares of life, choked out by the care of life and money, or things and stuff. And it's like, I think if we look at that parable, we can start to say, well, what is it that's preventing a harvest in my life? Is it money and things? Is it persecution? Is it the enemy's thoughts in my mind? Like we talked about the arrows and darts, because they're the 3 soil. The other one is
even the rocks. You could even say those rocks are those boulders that we're carrying around, right, where that seed doesn't dig in, right? So it could be that unforgiveness that you're carrying around in your heart.
Allowing those things in, but it's so awesome to have three witnesses come together and explain what God's done. And we get to see in each other.
What's amazing is, that simple phrase, you still want to sell it. It keeps coming. Like that guy keeps saying that.
It happened this summer at Pursuit when we were doing that men's retreat, and there's men getting baptized, people outside worshiping God. We had a double rainbow show up over the meeting tent, and David looks at me and goes, still want to sell the place? So just
a coincidence.
We're going to get a t-shirt.
Still want to sell the place.
And what I love about this, and again, we're not going to espouse people, we're going to get droves of people coming here, but it's just, there's something special about this property. And I think whenever you're faithful, and this is a tribute to Craig, you and Libby, on your faith and devotion to this, because we all know it's difficult to maintain property, and especially to maintain a business on a property. And then on top of that, to also weave your faith into that as well. So all of us are so grateful that you've committed and are able to take those darts of the enemy, because it's not an easy task. And we're here supporting you, but we're just really grateful for this, and even this podcast.
Yeah, just what it also wants me to, I feel to bring up is, that's why it's important who you hang around with. Because how many friends could have been like, man, sell it, get the money, you could do this. So it's like having godly friends in your life that gives you sound opinions and sound advice is so important.
Oh, absolutely. So, show me your friends, I'll show you your future.
Exactly. So David, thank you for being a brother.
Yeah.
And,
definitely, brother. Likewise.
Likewise. All this bro love. Yeah.
No, it's true, man. We say it all the time.
Like,
I think it was the iron sharpens iron, like one man sharpens another, which I believe is a Marine Corps saying, right?
Yeah.
And it's a biblical saying.
Biblical
saying, but the Marines use it, right?
Yeah.
But
so
Jesus. Jesus used that.
Jesus used it. Very cool. Hey, so we've kind of gone through this journey talking about story, right? Because you're amazing storytellers here, and hearing your story, and I know a lot of people listening are going to see it all joining together, and obviously Christ is at the center of that, and that's what this whole podcast is about, really testimonies, and we're hearing your testimony. And with your mother, and with how you grow up, and then obviously the hunt, and then how God's sort of fingerprints over all these things. The transition as you've come through, and you've nearly lost you've lost your identity. And you've gotten to this point where you've had a gun to your head, and I think a lot of the guys listening will start to see the pattern of an enemy here, where he throws a little bit in front of you. He doesn't. It's not like he gives it to you all at once and says, "Hey, just kill yourself." It's like, no, it comes in stages, and you flirt with it, and it's sort of like it's getting into sin, right? It's just listening, and as you were listening, it's kind of taking you down this path, and you got to a point where you had an empty chamber, and you're pulling the trigger. So with this next step, where was it that went? After that, it was like, I'm full on for God. What was the step?
I think once I was able to overcome that, and I kind of mentioned it earlier, it wasn't just this magical moment. And I don't know, some people have that. Some people, just like, speaking in tongues and other gifts, like I think some people have that, like, okay, I am saved and I am on fire, and this is the day for it. I think for me, what happened was, hey, you're saved, I'm here. I'm going to keep winking at you, and this is God. And I'm going to keep being there for you and reminding you that I'm here. But it's a continued fight, I think, every single day. And then you just, you pursue, right? It's almost like that you can pursue it every day. And the enemy's voice gets smaller and smaller. But the enemy never goes away, until Christ comes again. When we go into the last book of the Bible, when all of that happens, until that happens, the enemy will whisper in your heart every single day.
He plants seeds in your mind. That's what he does. That's his tactic.
And I think that's so important to mention. I want to add into that for a lot of people listening, or anybody listening, is that I think a lot of people can hear other people's testimonies, and we can say that we hear somebody on, at church, or we hear somebody that's come to the Lord on a podcast, and we're like, wow, they had this moment, man, and it was just there. But it's so true that we all have this different, as Christians, we all have this different journey of our testimony to Christ, and that constant, it's a battle, there's a fight, there's the wrestling with God, there's the growing in faith daily, and then really having your faith refined, like it talks about, like a fire in the scriptures, where you go through this, and you cast off those things that have, of the flesh, right? And so yours, it sounds, as I'm hearing it, has been, you've seen the fingerprint of God over everything you've been doing, and then as you've even got to the point of losing your identity, you're now realizing that am I right? I don't want to put words in your mouth, that your new identity is in.
Well, so, and it's funny you say that. So I've always believed that the Marine Corps was my identity, my purpose in life. It's really not that. The purpose that I found was, or kind of come in revelations, when I lost active duty Marine Corps time and got thrown off my path a bit. Because even as a Marine reservist now, you're not on the same path. My peers are promoting, they're lieutenant colonels now, and it's a different path. But at that moment, I also realized the Marine Corps is not my purpose. The Marine Corps is a vehicle that God has used for me to share His name and His glory and His gospel.
Wow.
Like, man, you could take my, your whole career. I could take my entire career and be like, if the sole purpose of that was to share Christ, it's mission accomplished, right? And we kind of talked about this earlier, was I had some very unique opportunities to share Christ in my role as a Marine, right? And Craig, you could probably attest to this. A lot of times when you think Marine, you don't necessarily think Christian, right? Like, I don't know what your experience with that back in the day is.
Yeah, I wasn't a believer while I was in, or if I was lukewarm towards the end of my career. But it's like with you being a devout Christian, strong in your faith, right? It's like, I would say the Marine Corps being a man of God in an organization that maybe necessarily isn't popular to be a Christian, or it's more of a Viking spirit, I would say. So
drinking,
chasing women,
partying,
and this isn't for everybody. I'm not stereotyping the Marine Corps, but a lot of it was living hard and fast.
Yeah. And to that point, to empathize with the young service members, is you're 22, 23 years old. You joined during a wartime. A 23-year-old or 19 or 20-year-old should not have to think like, oh, what am I going to do when I die, right? Yeah. But that's the reality of it, is they join young. So they live this hard and fast life. So you get this perspective of Marines of like, okay, they're going to drink hard, they're going to party hard, they're going to work hard.
Try to squeeze it all in just a very short
Try to squeeze it in. The Eleanor Roosevelt quote is like, I met the Marines of the world and they're the filthiest bodies and minds, but I'm going to butcher it, but she had an amazing, but I love the United States Marine, right? So that's kind of the image that a lot of the younger Marines get. So, but that doesn't, they don't need to exist in two stovepipes. Like one of the things where the blessing I had to be an instructor of Marine officers was to be able to witness in my own way to these young, impressionable leaders. And, and respecting kind of the boundary between instructor and my own faith. And I never actually evangelized while in that role, right? I would say things, but I'm blessed of this, I'm this, God really helped me out in my career. I would say things like that because that's naturally who I am, but I'm not out there evangelizing. The miraculous thing about that, and maybe some inspiration for folks who don't know where they stand, is, you don't need to be this Bible-thumping Christian to be a good Christian. And for the most part, it's actually the opposite of that. I think the downtrodden, the failures, the drug addicts, the Adam Browns that was a meth addict but now can witness, those are the ones that people want to listen to. You read the Bible and, Moses couldn't speak in public, and David was a womanizer, adulterer, right? Name it, right? Abraham denied his Sarah when he was scared, right? That's right. The story, the God doesn't use the miter is thou, I'm a preacher polish. He uses the broken. So what's amazing is I felt so blessed with the struggles and sufferings I had in life because I was able to use those stories to relate to Marines. But what was amazing is so after teaching an entire course, right, and we're broken down into 6-month courses at the school I was teaching at. Students would come up to me and be like, hey, sir, you mind talking to us about being a Christian and a Marine? Because we don't know how to do that. Kind of to your point of living hard and fast. And again, unprompted. I was not like, hey, on the schedule today is how to be a good Christian and a Marine. Students would come up, and this is so amazing. Students would come up knowing how I lived my life as a man and the things the words that I would use. They would know I'm a Christian. And I would say that's one of the proudest moments I have, is without even having to say Christ's name, right? And out there evangelizing, a lot of people around me would be like, I think he's a follower of Christ.
You could just tell.
The
Spirit with you.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So that was super humbling. But so they'll like, all right, cool. Anybody who wants to hear this is not a required class. I'm not pulling y'all in. Disclaimer, so I don't get fired by some politicians because I'm preaching Christ's name. We're doing this after hours. If you want to know my perspective on faith and being a Marine officer, folks could show up. And they're like, small percentage, class of 300, probably 10% would show up, right? So 30 to 40, so which is a huge blessing. And I always start off so what are your questions, right? They're bringing up, well, sir, we do this, and we're drunkards and Marines, they have pornography posters on their walls, and these are all true stories, right? They curse, they drink, they smoke. And the one thing, I don't know how I came to this, it's probably the Spirit. I'm like, to be a Marine, you're almost cheating when it comes to being a Christian. And they're like, what are you talking about, sir? I'm like, yeah, you're cheating. Like civilians don't have the advantage that you have to be a Christian. So don't think about being a Marine and a Christian as two different lenses. It's one and the same, and actually you have the benefit, right? So and I break it down for them. What's the purpose? Give me some purposes of being a Marine. It's like, well, sir, we go to combat and we defend righteousness. I'm like, okay. I was like, so
sounds familiar.
I know. So and then like we protect our brothers and sisters, and so we shield them from the darts of the enemy, right? Ephesians 6. Like,
wow.
And they're just throwing that at me. I was like, okay, so what else? And when I start pulling this out, I'm like, okay, so what are you willing to do for the person left and right of you? It's like, well, sir, I'm willing to give my life for them. Okay, so greater love hath no man than this, that he laid down his life for his friends. John 15:13.
Wow.
And they're like, yeah. Okay, so you're telling me part of being a Marine is to do that, right? What other profession does that? Like, I don't know, like EMT maybe, police officers. What other profession allows you to literally live out John 15:13? Greater, like to lay down my life for a friend. Right.
Wow.
It gives me chills to say that because no other job in the world does that. You're not going to do that as a banker. And again, love bankers, love everybody else. But the Marine Corps is so special, and the military in general, the Navy SEALs and everybody else. Our purpose is to win battles, and part of that is to possibly lay down our life for our friends. So check, like big check mark there. Being a Marine, you have an advantage because no other civilian is going to be able to actually say they're going to do that, right? And then protecting your fellow warriors. And then what are our core values, Greg?
Honor, courage, commitment.
Honor, courage, commitment. So honoring your family, right? Having courage to fight. The Bible talks about this. Yeah. Being committed to a certain type of faith. Being devoted to righteous values, right? Integrity. Talking about go through our leadership traits. JJ did Taibucko, right? It's just justice, right? Judgment. Like it's dependability. It's all tied together. So I tell them, like, hey, and your expectation of a Marine officer is what a great Christian would be. So even if you're an average Marine, right, or a SEAL or a sailor or anything else, even if you're an average one of those, you're still a great Christian. And the only other step is like to, hey, I accept Christ, and as my Lord and Savior. But the actions of just being a Marine. You're automatically doing things that a great Christian's going to do.
Yeah, so just to follow that, follow your mantra, to follow your creed, is to actually live out a Christian type life.
Yeah,
absolutely. And so then to ultimately pursue Christ and do that is the.
And the last note I kind of leave them with is, in what other job are you given 13 as a squad leader to 40 as a platoon commander? Adults to minister to. So as a 20-year-old or 22-year-old, I say, young man, I was put into a role. We talk about the authorities of man. The Bible gives you authority. So I had this authority as a Marine officer where I was literally handed and humbly handed the lives of 42 young men and given the responsibility to train them, equip them, bring them, go to combat with them, and then bring them home. No other job gives you the responsibility. And to the point where it's not just a job. It's because you get to know them, you get to know their families, you call up the spouses whenever something's wrong with the husband or they need help. You are just immersed in this person's life, but you are handed a flock of people to take care of. No other job does that. And even on the opposite side, in the private sector, and even in government, they're like, hey, you can't talk about my personal life.
Yeah, you're not calling on someone's spouse.
No, it's looked down upon.
Yeah,
you're like you can't.
You keep asking personal questions.
Yeah. Oh, I knew like my Marines' bank accounts. Like, what do you? I mean, as a first sergeant, what did you know? You knew everything. Yeah, medical records. Everything. And it's your responsibility. Your man-given responsibility and authority to have responsibility of these young men and women. No other job does that. So back to my, weaving back to my original point of like, it's cheating, guys, To even just be a Marine officer, Marine leader, Marine NCO, it's cheating it's cheating to be a Christian if you choose to accept that responsibility, because you're handed everything.
Wow, have you ever had anybody? This was straight from the Spirit of God. Is that right? So this wasn't like taught to you. This
I made
was
that up. I don't know.
Wow, wow, that's profound.
It just felt right. It was like, oh, I'd lived this life. I had this responsibility and
the values
and the values, and it's so humbling. Like as a young man or woman who's in charge of people and their lives, but to the point now, what do you do with that responsibility? You're given this opportunity to lead a flock. You're given values to follow along with, and you're given this trust that they have in you. Are you going to teach them? And Craig, I want to bring out the story you told me. Like when you were a drill instructor, you were like preaching some bad things, right?
Yeah.
Like, hey, go do this, go party, live hard and fast.
Yeah.
And that was before you found Christ. And you know, I'm sure those who had you as a drill instructor will listen to this podcast, hopefully be like, wow, Craig's really changed.
Just to talk on that is after I got saved, I never even thought about that, right? I was lost, and you're born again, you're living for Christ, and everything's hunky-dory, and then all of a sudden the enemy whispers in your head like, do you think you're really, look how many people you've impacted as a drill instructor. All them thousands of recruits that came through Parris Island that I'm telling them to party, live like Vikings, sleep with as many girls as you want, and just like, it's all about, pride and anyway, just, so I look back at that, and these guys are looking up to you. They want to be you. And I'm being an evangelist for the devil, essentially. And I look back on that, and I'm like, I couldn't sleep at night. I'm sitting there like tearing up, like, and because the enemy's good at lying. He plants that seed in your head, and you start believing that seed. Anyway, I was lost, and I can't imagine how many people I led astray. Anyway, so it's there are people that have amazing stories like you that lived and walked it, but there's guys like me that didn't have that opportunity. Or I wasn't a believer, and I was an evangelist for the opposite team. And anyway, God forgives you, and He'll take that, and turn it for good. So
He does, and I'll bring this too. And we don't want to point out specific names, but there's been some guys who've reached back out to you though.
Absolutely.
After you found Christ, and then now are. And just through your outfitter, through us, having this venue in itself, folks are realizing you've changed as a man. And I would say, Blaze would say this too, is no better evangelist or Christian brother who has lived that hard and fast life for both of you. And then now are believers, and you can see the fruits that God has planted in your lives and the favors that you get to live. And I love being around y'all as brothers because you're not the perfect polished. None of us are.
What do you mean?
Yeah, I know. I know. But we're not the polished folks, right? Like I struggled where I grew up and everything else, and people don't relate to that. And I've found that a lot of those folks actually push people away because you never actually lived that tough life and found Christ and know the benefits of Christ. So, that's just one of the blessings I've had being in my role as a Marine and being blessed to lead Marines is having the ability to influence in that way. But now, like you said, I do reflect, did I give everything I could to glorify His name during that time? And if not then, hopefully this podcast would be able to reach some of those folks and be like, hey, David was the man leading me because of his faith, because he was a Christian. That's why he treated me the way he treated me. And that's what I want people to know. It's like, I did not evangelize when I was in the roles. I was not I wasn't throwing Christ in their face, but I was the leader that I was and the man and the Marine that I was because of my faith and because of Christ. So it's been an incredible journey there.
Wow. So let that breathe for a second, because I think a lot of people can take from that. And then I think if we are just to even look at the work that we do daily, it might not have the creed. I mean, every job you go to, they want you to do well.
Yeah.
They want you to perform well. They want you to represent the company well, no matter what you do, right? If it's your own business or you work for somebody else. So I think that same concept, that same idea can be modeled in no matter what we do. And that's it's representing Christ, isn't it? It's like that's what Paul said. It's no longer I who lives; it's Christ who now lives in me. And so every single man of God, every woman of God, every person that has Christ and has the scriptures, the word of God sitting in front of them, has no excuse but not to have every creed, every idea that God's ever put forward to people. They have that in their hands, and we can go out and actually live that. And you were then modeling that through this structure and organization that you had that was trying to embody that. And then now you've used that to raise up these young people. But even in your own world, you still had these. It's good for everybody to know. It's not like you were the perfect person. You still had an identity issue.
His identity was Christ.
And then the identity with the Marines though as well. Like when that got challenged, like losing your fiance and then we
weren't engaged then, but the person I thought I was going to get married to,
and then so it all sort of like comes back to like this is a journey, and then you see where you're sitting right now and what I've witnessed as a friend to you, and seeing your like the way you just you treat brothers, like new people coming in, you've met for 2 minutes, you have that same way. Like the first time I met you when we told the story of Davey, like there you and I were broing down in like a couple of minutes, and just it felt like it does right now. It doesn't feel any different. And I think we were skinning meat off a deer.
Yeah,
or
we were
something
doing
at the time.
Well, it's funny. It was 'cause I think I remember one statement he says like to Craig, was like, "Where'd you meet this guy? Where'd you find this guy?" It's like, wow, which was one of the most humbling things to hear. But to your point, actually, you asked earlier about my identity is, with the Marine Corps still there, with the purpose and everything, I feel that my Marines are magnificent. They're the ones who made me who I am as a leader, and Christ kind of guided us through it. But as a warrior, I think that's what really the Marine Corps did for me, was gave me the warrior mentality, the warrior ethos. But now, as in the current state, is we're in a spiritual warfare. And I think what's so amazing is the Marine Corps gave me the traits and the tools to be a warrior. But now I know that the true application of my true identity, being a follower of Christ, but the true application of spiritual warfare now. And it's the same. We talked about this before you went to India for your trip. It was like, hey, you're going to be attacked by the enemy. How do we break that down? Are we doing the intelligence preparation of the battlefield? Did you break down the scheme of maneuver? How are you going to attack this large? Like, it's not just a network. It's almost like fighting an insurgency. You're not attacking some of the symptoms and the lower players. You have to attack the larger spiritual players, right? And you have to identify what those are, right? Be it the spirit of whatever, right?
To give a little context to this, it was Craig and I went to India. You probably somebody might have seen that in the last podcast we released, and as we went in there, we really did feel. You feel this oppression, you feel a fear, because we were told Christians get burned to death there. You feel like there's a lot of persecution, and so Pham basically ran through with us, and sort of we had this sit down, and we sort of looked at what is the strategy of going into this place from a spiritual perspective, and just it was eye-opening for me just to see, we know we're in a battle, and all the men that'd be listening, women that'd be listening would know that we are. But you need to look at it like these strategies that you've just put forward, that if you don't understand the enemy, it says, what does it say? To be innocent as doves and as cunning as snakes, So we have to understand the fight that we're in, and if we don't, we're going to get overwhelmed by an enemy. And so...
What's the scripture that says, be strong, be a man, be courageous, but do it with love?
Stand up.
It's like 1 Corinthians, I forget what it is towards the end, but what was the first thing he says? But he was like...
strengthen yourself, stand up, be a man, be courageous, go out and do it. I mean,
and do it with love.
Do it with love, So
that's incredible.
But I think, that just gives a bit of context to people. And I think that it's interesting to see how many, as I'm seeing in this sort of community that we're in here in Maine, there's a lot of military community. And also, as I'm seeing through other podcasts and other stories, and obviously there's other projects that I'm working on that are bringing a lot of different military backgrounds together. I'm seeing so many of these guys coming to the Lord. And so many of them are saying to me now, as I'm having conversations across multiple projects, so many of them are saying, one particular guy comes to mind, I won't mention his name, he's in the Navy and retired Navy, and he's like, man, this feels just like warfare. This feels just like battle. And he's like, this is intense. I haven't experienced like this. This is a conversation he and I had maybe a couple of weeks back. Yeah. And just to see the convergence of that, he's like, man, this is no joke. Yeah. And I think if a lot of people really think to it, it's not overselling it. It is a battle. We are in a battle for minds. We're in a battle for either living for God or living in death. Yeah. And if we don't step up as men of God and realize that we're in this battle, learn from the strategies that you've learned from, that you've learned.
Fight against flesh and blood, fight against principalities and
powers of darkness. That's right. Yeah. And so if we understand that, then we can sort of come together as brothers. You're not a lone soul, like you're not a lone warrior, right? Trying to fight the battle yourself. You come together with your brothers and sisters, whoever, as a body of Christ. So do you want to talk about this a little bit, like any thought that you have just around that and how a little bit of strategy, it doesn't have to be War and Peace, but just like a bit of a strategy of how you could advise people to think about going forward, brothers in the Lord, sisters in the Lord?
I definitely, it takes a lot of reflecting because you don't want to come in, you can come off however you want to come off. But a lot of people look at the folks who talk about spiritual warfare as like this, we'll see like a whimsical magic battle. It's like, it's really not, right? When you reflect on things like Hollywood or just different aspects of our society, one proof of it is the attack on our children.
Yeah, right.
Right, like you can actually look this up. There's I think maybe Business Insider pushed something out, and it's like how do you deconstruct a government? How do you deconstruct a nation? For me, how you do that is, and separate from all those things that are true, you could win a war without firing a round by taking out the children.
Yeah, right.
Right.
The next generation.
Yeah, so when you destroy a generation, when you destroy their thought process, when you destroy their values, and you put it into a narcissistic view of themselves, and they believe that, oh, goodness comes from me and not from Christ or another high power. Like, oh, I'm good. That means therefore all my opinions are good. I'm like, okay, when you start drilling it down, that's why a lot of folks just really combat each other. There's no singular like voice on that side. It's more so. It's belief in self, and like once you start believing in yourself, the enemy wins.
That self is truth.
It's self is truth, right?
Yeah. What I think is true, so therefore it's true.
It's true, and what I think is good, therefore it's good.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, so but your good is different from their good, even if it's by a little bit. So what is the ultimate truth in goodness? So all that being said, what I try to live, how I try to live my life is knowing that there is an enemy. It is attacking and is attacking our children. And how do I, as a man, combat that, right? Being a role model. And one of the things that growing up, what changed my life, and kind of rewinding a little bit, was male mentors and female mentors and women mentors growing up. Strong parental guidance and leadership. My mom was a single mom. She did an incredible job. Embedded great values. But I've always said this, if it wasn't for the other coaches and teachers and my school counselor in my life, I wouldn't be where I am. So I think that is what I challenge folks with, is focus on the children. Like if you're worried about what's happening in politics and what's happening in the world, my biggest fear is not being here to fight it, which is a very real fear. So how are we preparing our children to fight it?
Yeah, right.
So what I believe is you have to ingrain these faith values into our children. And then they're going to potentially be the ones that picks up the shield and sword later on, because we may not be the chosen generation to fight the battle. We may, right? But no, like Christ says, we're never going to know when he's going to come again, right? It's going to be like a thief in the night. It's coming soon. Yeah, it's coming soon.
There's no question.
But but we still don't know the exact time and day, so we need to prepare. What if we're off by a decade, and it's like, okay, we're too old to fight. We're like Blaze and Craig and Dave out there, like, hey, let's go. I know the walkers. But have we done justice for our children by preparing them?
That's good.
Yeah. And the way we do that as men, right? Women have their roles as well, which is incredible leadership and nurturing, and I think faith really grows from the women in our lives, and we have amazing women and spouses, and we're so grateful for them. There's also a role that man plays. So know your identity and as a follower of Christ, but also know where God put you as the father figure, mother figure. Are you the protector and the man? So what are the things that we're supposed to do? We're supposed to protect. We're supposed to lead. We're supposed to be the spiritual, like, hey,
Yeah, our family's our first ministry.
our families are first ministries, right? And then our wives nurture that.
Yeah.
And then they grow our families. So, and then let's say you're not married, right? So now so what do you do now? It's like, okay, we'll continue to push his word, push the gospel. And, you know, if you are blessed with the spouse, great. If not, then hey, your spouse is the church, right? Like dedicate yourself to serve in that way. So I think, you know, my shift in my identity has shifted from a lot of what being a Marine Corps warrior in the physical state to more of a spiritual warfare and praying over folks, praying in the spirit, being there, checking on your brothers and sisters. You know, meanwhile, still physically prepared. I think all of us are prepared to battle whenever we are. We have that heart in us, and you know, there's battles in the Bible, and Christ creates warriors to physically fight. But I think more importantly, spiritually fight and helping lead our brothers and sisters, love them or not love them, or like them, not like them, but we love them, and helping them on their journey to Christ. And we're not going to be we're not going to be the savior. We're not going to be the guy that's going to, or gal that's going to be like, oh, thank you so much, you led me to Christ. We may have just been a whisper, Davy or whoever, and planted the seed, and you know, Libby says this and I love it. It's like sometimes you plant the seed and you water and then you move on.
The Bible says that.
And the Bible said that, right? And Libby repeated it today when I heard it, but the Bible says that. It says, and it may not be your job to pick the fruits of this tree yet, right? And
it's the Holy Spirit's job to convict.
So
it's
never
our job to witness.
Yeah.
And to go on then, it's like we have to live the life. We have to be an example, right? And it's through the fruit of the Spirit. Like you are love. You know what I mean? You love people. When people meet David, they're just drawn to you. And and you can even see some people who are pastors' children, right? Where they rebel off and go away. And I'm not saying this for everybody, but that pastor, that man of God, was really good at witnessing and evangelizing to people out in town, but the family was neglected. Or maybe he came home from work, he was upset and you know, so people like, they'll sit there, the children look at the dad and be like, I know who my real dad is. Like you go on Sunday and you preach from the pulpit, all this stuff, but at the house, you're not present. You're not doing this to me. And that's why it's so important we have to live and walk the walk. It's like, because our children, our families, our first ministry. And whenever that's equally yoked, that's when God will use you to do great and mighty things.
Yeah, that's actually so important for everyone to realize, is that it's the love of those around you, but the first ministry is exactly our family. It's our wives, loving our wives, protecting our wives, like you just said. And I think I've really started to understand that and I had understood that from the past life that I'd been in and what I'd come out of. And now realizing what I needed to do to protect my wife, to be like, hey man, there is so many different things that are firing at us.
And it's work. Marriage is work.
It's full on. There's no question. And then even our children, like from our living in Los Angeles the last 12 years or whatever, us deciding to bring our daughter out of school, and I'll go into that another time, but just what we saw being thrown at our 4-year-old daughter in terms of ideas and concepts, invited to gay parties and all sorts of things that were just like so demonic that are being thrown on our child. And it got to a point where we were like, okay, I have to step up and protect my family. And if I don't do that, then and what is the way of doing that? It's like, okay, well, we're going to bring our daughter in, we're going to train her and raise her up in the ways of God. And then God ended up bringing it that we ended up coming to Maine and actually starting a ministry here and then seeing how God brought everything together. So so anyway, I suppose off of the back of that, it's just saying our role as men, as identity, as protectors, as providers, and doing that in Christ in the love of God and loving those around us is the key.
Yeah, and what's funny is, you know, I get in these conversations with my brothers all the time in my men's group, and we talk about all these world-changing things, like how do we save the world and this and that, and the thing that we've always come back to, like the last sentence out of any of this, is, you know how you change the world? You raise your family right. Because if every single family raised their child or their children right, nucleus family, father, mother, and be able to raise them in Christ and good values. If every family in the world did that, I truly believe that we'll live in a better place, right? But not everybody gets the luxuries of that. And I think that's where our responsibility as men is our family. and then also stepping beyond that when we're able to, and be the mentors and be the light and be the guides for folks. And in the future, what Natalie and I want to do is create a mentorship for inner city youth to come out where, if the parents are working 2 jobs, they're struggling, and they're just trying to put food on the table. It takes a village. Everybody says that, but where's the village? You need to step up to be the village if you really believe in that. So it's going to take us as men and women to be able to step into this role and help out these parents. And we can't point fingers like, oh, you're a bad mom. Oh, you're doing this. You're abusing the power. Like, no, you need to step up as your neighbor, as their neighbor, and to be those mentors, like all those mentors I had, right? And I think part of that too is just, I've always said this about kindness and being more empathetic for people. When I got back from deployment, my perspective on life and loving your enemy, we kind of talked about this earlier, kind of changed because, so a lot of times we get frustrated. People cut you off in line. People swerve in front of you. People yell at you. People are being jerks here in America. Or even like seeing kind of people in need. I remember walking into a dollar store, and again, I grew up on subsidized, government subsidies. I saw this mother buying ramen and Mountain Dews with her EBT food stamp card. And there was like this, what are you doing? Like, you're abusing this power, we're giving you, and I was angry. And then I realized like, no, they're our brothers and sisters, right? And we need to love them, and we need to be able to help this village, right? And the other thing that really helped me was when I went to combat, we've been shot at. And I was able to come to the idea of like loving your enemy. And after, and if I'm able to love my enemy who's trying to shoot at me, that person who's cut me off in traffic is probably not that bad.
Yeah.
Right? Or that person who's kind of abusing the EBT card is not that bad. Yeah. Right? Like, it's just like little things like, it's not that bad. So one, I don't need to be frustrated with them, but 2, how do I minister to them? And how do I step up and be the man and have this tribe of brothers around me where we go out now, we're not complaining about people. We're looking at them as missions. And we're looking at them of how do I serve better and how do I step up to the role that Christ wanted me to have. And one thing I always say is the mission's one. There's this movie out there, it's called Hacksaw Ridge.
Oh, yeah.
It's about, this guy decides to be a conscientious observer in World War II, does not want to fight around, wants to be a medic. People are trying to court-martial him, get him kicked out. And then he ends up saving a lot of lives. And one of the things he always said in it was, just one more.
That's right, yeah.
And he's like lowering his brothers in arms who's got legs blown off. And then he's dropping him down this cliff, and he releases him. His hands are ripped off, because this is a true story, Medal of Honor recipient, right? His hands are all ripped up from the rope, and he picks himself up covered in blood and runs back. Just one more, Lord. Lord, just give me the strength to save one more. And I think for me, that is so indicative of what a good Christian could be. The mission's one. If you lived 5 minutes on this earth, or you have 5 minutes left, but you created one other fellow Christian, or you gave him planted a seed of salvation, like your angels are praising in heaven, right? So for me in life, I think to your point, and is what's my mission? I was like, just one more.
Yeah, right.
One more conversation. One more person to meet, to not be a stranger to. Even if it's just a hi, hello.
And the power of one, right? One person had a witness to Billy Graham, and look how many people he impacted.
And that's it. So if anybody's lost, or anybody doesn't know what to do, or like, hey, I don't know where I'm at as a Christian, one, to find your faith, but 2, if you're developed in it, you feel like you're getting stagnant, like just one more, find somebody and just tell them your story. And what's amazing about the Spirit, you don't need to make stuff up. You don't need to be a pastor. You don't need to get a degree of this. God gave you the story to tell to bring somebody to Christ. And all you have to do is be bold enough to tell your story. So
it's amazing.
Yeah.
That's powerful, fam. You're a legend, brother.
I love you.
No, we love you, man.
I love you, brother.
You are a legend, brother.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you taking the time to come up here and on the way back from Canada from your hunt. And and the
To bring some moose meat back.
Yeah, you get some moose
I
meat
got
for
you.
us?
We're good.
Having
Yeah,
that
I do.
tonight? Cool.
We got
Moose
it.
meat's good, everybody.
Yeah.
So I suppose we'll just close this out just by just honoring you, saying thank you for everything you've done and for how you've lived and been a major influence to me, and I think embodiment of a leader and a brother in Christ. And so thank you so much, brother.
Yeah.
Love you, man.
Hey, love you all, and praise God, guys. So it's incredible.
Got a lot of work to do.
A lot of work to do.
Yeah.
Just one more.
Just one more.
One more.
Thanks, guys.
All right, guys.
Yeah.
If you'd like to learn more about our ministry, check out our website at lightinthewilderness.org.